What is happening out there, rotoscouts football fans? We've been procrastinating long enough, gang. Time to get into this week one main slate. Lot to talk about. 7:30 start time for the show. No, we had Calvin in here a second ago and Trey in here a second ago. I'm seeing 0 viewers so far, but I'm sure some people will pop in. Everybody was here a minute ago. Might or might not be showing it to me now, but welcome, guys. Trey said it feels like Christmas morning. Like that. Calvin Dunn says it's time, y'all. Love it. Glad to see the excitement, gang. Trey, I agree. I'm always excited the day before any season starts, but particularly football, just because of the massive prize pools, the dreams of winning $1 million, and so on and so forth that we all go through. And there's just so many fun options to talk about before the first week of an NFL season with how some of these teams are going to look, reminding ourselves how that we build these. That hat is ugly, though. Are you referring to the Giants logo or just the dirty, abused nature of the hat? Both are true. You want to see a really ugly hat? Is it back there? These are the remnants of the hat that I wore mostly through high school. That is a dirty, disgusting rag at this point, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It used to be a University of Maryland hat. Just sits over there in the corner. I didn't actually realize how dusty and nasty it is. Oh, look at that. It actually landed up there. Go me. Bird Nerd asks, how'd I do? That looks like it's from 1930. Yeah, it's seen better days. That's the first time it's been moved probably since I moved the DVDs and stuff over to this side of the room and the camera over here. Definitely the first time that thing's been moved. But that thing is, that used to be a like dark red, like the Superman back behind me over there. It's always difficult to tell which shoulder it is because it's the opposite on the screen. But that used to be like that color red, University of Maryland Terps hat. And when I was in high school, I bleached it so it was like this weird, like white off pink looking thing. It just beat it into the ground. It was nasty. It had a duct tape holding the brim together at the end. It was just couldn't bring myself to stop wearing it until it just completely fell apart. But that was had a bunch of hats back in the day. Now I'm down to just the few that you guys typically see me rotate through. But yeah, that was the old one. But as I was saying, there's one tangent down. Not bad. Bird Nerd's here. Bird Nerd, how'd I do Thursday? I was really pleased with my entries on Thursday. I love the pool of entries that I got to. I had a competing lineup that was within a point of winning the thing that was only tied 4 ways. So it would have been a 6-figure chop. Just came down to it had both of the Rishi Rice TD that we talked about and the Blake Bell play. It had both of those in it. My one issue was that I didn't have that combination of 2 guys that I liked as value guys in enough lineups together, but I also didn't want that because of the limited ceilings that we talked about with getting to too many of those value plays. So I really liked my entries. I loved it. It was competitive. I ended up down a couple of bucks because slipping by less than a full point knocked me back. Me and my 4 people fell behind a like 120 some odd user train that was a different combination of the same lineup that had Pat Mahomes in the MVP instead of Amon-Ra. I needed any kind of positive catch from Amon-Ra down the stretch there. Would have been probably a 6-figure win. But good day. Fun first slate. Really pleased with how everything went. Definitely looking forward to getting into this one with you guys. Lot to talk about. Tons of stuff up on the site. Looks like we've got a quorum. We can get rolling. 13 people here. I'm sure we'll have some more trickling in. Jake Swales is here. Poe DGen Stoner's here, of course. Could be Travis, Bills Mafia in the house. Alabama Jones. Got some Bama. We've got some Northeast. We got some Southeast. Apparently, some of us are going to get hit at some point, I think toward the end of this week, by some kind of massive hurricane that's brewing out in the Atlantic. I'm really hoping it's not a Hurricane Sandy round 2. That was not pleasant. I was down the hill in Hoboken when that one hit a few years back, and I was living like a refugee for about a week. It was no power, couldn't get anywhere. Entire streets were flooded out. It was weird. Not what you expect living in New Jersey. But since then, I'm about 100 and change more feet above sea level, probably more. Came up the hill into Jersey City Heights, so that's a little bit better. Could be Travis wants to talk about Keenan Allen. I like that spot. We'll talk about that one. I think that one's not till a little bit later. The games are arranged when we get to the board eventually in alphabetical order, not in time order, just because it was easier for my sanity to do it that way. So they'll be a little bit out of order, like as if you look at it as going through the day, but I really don't think that matters. So we'll see how that goes. Jake Swales had that same situation with Hurricane Irma. Yeah, I mean, anytime you get knocked out of your normal routine, it's tough. But then when you pile on like no power, no heat, you realize how important and how thin the margin is between some of those things. After like 2 days, it's you're living in the cold. You're just completely miserable. I can't imagine, obviously, living life that way. 9 days no power for Jake. Wow, jeez. Yeah, I was like I said, 7 and change. Took 4 days before I could even get off my block. We had people literally coming outside and like sharing, sharing food. This is gonna go bad. Let's have a little block party outside. Fortunately, right before it, I had actually taken a walk over to Target. I knew the storm was coming. I didn't know how bad it was gonna be, but I walked over to Target and I bought myself. I had just started reading it at the time, so the second and third books of the Game of Thrones series. And I finished one of them during the Hurricane Sandy. It was that was the only thing to do. Literally after sunset, I'd be in there, and it was in the fall, so sunset was at like 6. So I'd be in there just reading by a flashlight, the battery-operated flashlight that I bought. It's ridiculous. Showered in a pool. God. Yeah, that sounds rough, Jake. Inside Foot, Outside Foot says, our efforts are appreciated. Thank you, Inside Foot, Outside Foot. Don't recognize your screen name. Welcome. If you've been here before, I appreciate you coming back. If it's your first time, glad you found us. Glad you're saying hello. So let's start talking shop here, gang. What do you think? Probably in for a bit of a marathon, so buckle up. Like I said earlier on the baseball show, I've been basically 2 all-nighters back-to-back to get things in order. Finally got myself all caught up. I feel pretty good. I'm sure we'll run into a couple of things where I'm like, shit, what's that guy's name? And, forgetting to bounce between data points. Got to bear with me as I jump between some of these screens too. But I think a good place to get us started off is just to maybe show off something that's up on the site for you guys. So that's probably not the best one. Yeah, we'll do it like this. What's the one I was looking at? Yeah, that one works. So this is one that people, I used to write this over at the other place, and people really were asking about it. They were asking about it last year when I wasn't doing it anymore, and then a couple people were asking about it, going into this year if it was going to come back. So I decided I definitely wanted to include it. If and when a paywall lands on this site, it may or may not end up in front, behind, who knows. But this is something that I think is really, really valuable. And what I did was I go through here, and I just give you the entire rundown on what I do as far as optimizer groups, rules, limits, settings, all the advanced options, unique players, team salaries, restrictions on the flex position. I typically take tight ends out of the flex position, make a couple exceptions for maybe, some of your extreme tight ends like your Mark Andrews's and your, everybody else of the world, your Travis Kelce's when he's healthy and so on. But it's really, really thin in terms of who I actually want at flex outside of a couple of double tight end type pairings. So I limit that typically. I explain what global exposures are and what the different kinds of global exposures are and how it actually operates within the mechanism of when this thing's building lineups. What do these different functions actually do? So I make recommendations on that. Then I get into actually what the rules that I set are, how to create the stacks, how to focus on the actual team stacks, the actual combinations that we want to get to from these groups. And the way that I do that is just essentially driving everything through the quarterback position. I think it's the most critical thing about NFL lineup building anyway, is that everything is essentially driven by that quarterback choice. Even if you build lineups by saying, all right, I'm going to plug in a running back pair that I really want to get to, these 2 high-end running backs, that's still going to winnow your quarterback pool down to a certain point, and then the rest of that lineup is still going to be informed by who you select at quarterback. Because when you go to quarterback, you're taking one of his pass catchers almost infallibly. There are no absolutes, so yes, you can make exceptions. A guy like Lamar, maybe you don't have to stack necessarily with his receiving core. I always do, or almost always do. But there are some, moderate, some loose exceptions, like anything else. But by and large, we always want to be grabbing at least a primary receiver, sometimes a second one. You can absolutely double stack. There's plenty of room for that. And a lot of the time, and specifically within this rule set, what I try and get to is a run back play, not a running back, a run back play. So a player from the other team that's going to act in a competitive way to continue the scoring, to drive up the total score on both sides, because you can't have a football game. It's not like baseball where one team can go out and score 25 runs and the other team will put up a 0 and the first team just keeps on hitting and just keeps on circling the bases. In football, once you hit a certain point in the game, you've got a 3-score lead, you slam the brakes on, you start running the ball, you start milking the clock, wind things down. We've seen it happen a million times. So that's what you want to avoid with your stacks. You don't necessarily want to go to the team that's the supreme favorite. You kind of want highly totaled close games, because those will feed each other back and forth. And if you can capture that stack where you've got the right QB, the right pass catcher who gets in the end zone, and the right guy from the other team that's going to push it back the other way, put up a big score of his own, that just rises the whole thing up. So that's really what we're shooting for with most of this. And that's what these rules are going to trigger. So you want to get quarterback with at least one wide receiver, tight end from the same team. You can set it to 2, or you can make 2 different groups. So you can go wide receiver and tight end in one. You can throw running back into the other one. You can make one just wide receiver and one wide receiver or tight end. You can vary the combinations, but you always want to make rules that you're telling it, hey, every time I build a lineup, I want a correlated player with my quarterback. Quarterback with at least one wide receiver, running back, or tight end from the opposing team. I always prefer the pass catchers, but high volume running backs are absolutely effective in that run back role as well. It's got to be a high volume guy, preferably a high volume guy who does a lot of scoring on a pass inefficient kind of a team. So I'm always looking to put one of those guys in, and then just little rules like at most 0 defensive play defense. I don't know why that was so difficult to say. At most 0 defenses from the same team. And basically by making that quarterback decision, you take both defenses out of play. You're not going to play the defense against your quarterback most of the time. And I don't like playing the quarterback's own defense because, like I just said, I want scoring in that game. And a lot of the time, if the quarterback's marching up and down the field, he's going to leave his defense out there quite a bit. If they're scoring quickly, the defense rolls right back out. They get exposed to just, the point scoring negative score creations. All of a sudden you give up, now you're outside the 6-point threshold for, 6 points, and you drop down by 5. Potigen Stoner, I don't like rules. This column is not your column then, my friend. Check out the rankings column. All the rankings position by position are updated as of earlier today. I got to go back into it and catch the most recent wave of updates. That's the projection set that we're going to be looking at on the show here. So if there's anything popped up, people are announced out or whatever, or something looks funky, just let me know in the chat. Work in progress, gang. Like I said, with the baseball show, it took us a little bit to hit our stride. I had to figure out exactly how I wanted to do things, and I think it's going to be the same with this. Limits, custom rules requirements. I like limiting the total numbers of players from a team to 3, but you can pump that up, obviously, if you're going to bigger stacks. But typically, that's going to give you your quarterback, your 2 receivers. I don't really like going beyond that because at a certain point, even in a very high-scoring game, there are thresholds. There's only so many plays that are going to be run. There's only so many scoring plays to go around, only so many yards gained to go around, only so many targets, however you want to boil it down. Same thing on the other side. Limit wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends from the same team to 1 unless paired with a quarterback from the same team or from the opposing team. So that gives us the on the quarterback's team as a correlated scoring play or against the quarterback so that they can be that run back. But what I don't want to get to is 2 skilled players from the same team when I don't have the quarterback. So I don't want like the running back and the tight end from another team where they're, let's say McCaffrey and Kittle as a bad example. I don't want those 2 guys without the quarterback that are stacked within something that doesn't have anything else from that game. I want to have everything structured out the right way. So that's what these rules are shooting for. And you can pull this article up. It's up on the website right now, and it's totally free. And you can just plug these settings directly in. Most of the websites, most of the optimizers use basically like fill in the blank sentences. You can select the position from a drop down. So it'll say, limit, pick the position from same team. It'll be, very straightforward on how to set these up. They do it in slightly different ways from site to site, but you should be able to take this rule set and apply it on any different optimizer site. Obviously, there's one big optimizer out there that I used to write this for very specifically, and I don't anymore. I generalized it a little bit more than I used to. I'm going to drop a Sunday update tomorrow morning, catch any changes, and I'll make recommendations. I mentioned it on the baseball show earlier, since I can't actually get into Fantasy Cruncher anymore. I can't do the exact plus 25% for this guy, plus 15 for that guy, but I can tell you where to nudge based on, where the salaries are, what the points are, It also depends very much on whose projections you're using and a lot of other things. So that was always a little bit arbitrary anyway between us. But it does help give you, some real specific constructions, and it helps. The goal there is to create a pretty equitable, pretty even spread across different combinations with that same stack. Could be Travis says, chances of picking a 9-number combination lock, 1 in 100,000. Chances of picking a 5-number lock, 1 in 1,000. Correlation is your friend. Correlation is your friend. I like that. Rain Man. Bo Jason called him Rain Man. Good boy, Joker. Go lie down. So that's basically what we talk about here. The construction concept, using the quarterback as the key player when you put these groups together. And then I give you each group for each team. And I tell you exactly how I put it together. So each team gets 2 different groups, right? So each game will have 4 different groups. The quarterback is the key player. You give it a setting, exactly 1, at least 1, between 1 and 3, whatever you want to do. I make my recommendations here. List out the skill players, and then an opponent group with at least one of these guys from the other team. And then all the way down the bottom, we go back, and on the other side of that game, we've got the Washington group. And I do this for all the different games. So each game's going to have 4 different groups associated with it in the Fantasy Cruncher configuration. Or at least that's how they used to do it. That's how I do it on the RG apps. That's how it works on most of these. I always want to have a specific group so that I can control, rather than just saying I want one player from the opposing team regardless of who it is. Using these group settings allows you to get in there and specify, I only want it to be from the receiving core. I don't want a running back in this one. If you go down like to the Bears game here, Justin Fields, we get this core of his receivers, at least one of these guys. It allows the possibility of 2 of them, at least one of these guys. And I include Aaron Jones in this side of it. But then if you go down to the Packers side, Aaron Jones is not included in the group that goes with Jordan Love. I do that intentionally because when it's the quarterback's direct correlation, I want to have just basically the receiving core. And then sometimes you'll get the running back anyway as the next man in to hit that third limit, whether or not it goes with the group. Sometimes they'll just come up. And I typically leave running backs out of these processes anyway because I want those gaps to just be filled by the highest projected, most efficient, most likely running backs anyway. So that's why we're building these stacks using mostly the pass catchers. We create the mesh for those guys to just kind of fall into from the running back position. And you tend to get them in the right spots when you build it this way. So that's kind of how I like to put this stuff together. Literally every player that I'll be using is right here. These are the groups that I'll be using. So it's all up on the site. The projections I'm going to be using are all up on the site. So I welcome you guys to sink or swim with me, or sink or swim on your own. But I would definitely try and use these kind of constructions. And it's worth a read. I know there's a lot of words here. Some of it's a little gobbledygooky as you start reading through, the descriptions of how those functions work. But I think it's worth a quick read. You only really need to read the top part of this once. This is going to be a lot of the same looking throughout these weeks. I'll keep most of these settings informations here. And the key, week to week, and then Saturday and Sunday, the key updates are going to be obviously on who's included in the groups and why and where. With that in mind, could be Travis says everyone going to play Jefferson and Hill. Not enough people will play Devontae Adams. I like that. It's a good call. Let's jump over to, put this back up real quick. I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go like this. And we'll go like that. All right, we got the board up. Game by game. Like I said, we've got it in alphabetical order here. DK projections, FanDuel projections, DK salaries, FanDuel salaries. Ignore some of the missing DK. I have to fix I forgot the naming convention for defense was different when I moved I've got way too many files for this. This is the dashboard for the shows that you guys see. I've got my sorting file that needs all of these different updates each time dropped into it, each time I change the projections. Then I've got the actual projections file. I got to unify all this stuff, so I've just got to be working in one place, or at least automate some of these data pulls. But we're getting it all together. So diving into, I guess, our first game here. What do you guys think? Let's narrow it on down. Arizona and Washington. Washington, pretty heavy favorites against an Arizona team that is not going to be trying at all to win this year. They named Joshua Dobbs their starting quarterback in kind of a surprising move. 38 total, a fairly low total in this one. And most of the offense expected to be stacked on the Washington side. They have an okay enough 22.5 point total. They're minus 4.5 point favorites. Or excuse me, that's old data. They're minus 7 point favorites now. So significant favorites for the Washington side of things. Some of these notes are going to mismatch some of the data. I just updated this column for the Vegas data, and some of the run totals. There's one. Some of the EMAC's in the house. Our old pal. Sounds like rotoscouts is looking for an intern. We'll accept your applications and we'll evaluate them accordingly, sir. Send it on in. Anytime you want. Love to have you on, buddy. But I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you coming out and joining us. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button while you're here. Trey says EMAC and Terry was always a great duo. I appreciate that, buddy. It was always my favorite show to do with EMAC. It was always a great time. Hopefully one day, again, we'll see what happens. Both these teams, a little bit of a new offense, should be a little bit of up-tempo for the Commanders, where I think the bulk of the work for the Cardinals is going to go to Mr. Connor here. He's probably going to be pretty high volume, but it's not a great situation. He's going up against a decent Washington defense. Washington is the... Gotta bear with me as I remember where these columns are. This is the opposing DVOA, projected DVOA for this season. Washington has the fourth ranked projected defensive DVOA. So Arizona, pretty tough road to hoe here in week one with a pretty bad team, an unproven QB. He's got interesting-ish targets. The tight ends are both good. If Zach Ertz plays, he's reasonable. Trey McBride, not Terry McBride, but Trey McBride is cheap, has a little bit of potential if Ertz doesn't go. I think there are some interesting offensive options, but they're better as just runbacks for stacks on the Washington side of things. Dobbs, 2 starts for the Titans last year, pretty bad. 6 yards per pass attempt, 7.70 intended air yards per pass attempt, 58.8% completions and 2 TDs. Ran a little bit, 4 rushes a game, 5.5 yards per rush attempt. But just Washington's defense is really the story in that situation. I don't expect him to be able to really run or make anything happen through the air. Connor's going to probably be bottled up, but he'll see a ton of volume in this offense. 17.6 touches, 14.1 attempts, 4.5 targets a game last year, 7 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown, 5.17 yards per target with an 8.2 yards after the catch. A couple of big fantasy scores in weeks without Kyler Murray last year, where he was just getting similar kind of volume, what we expect for volume. So they were just feeding him the ball in those situations. So there's a little bit of potential for Connor, but again, I think that defense just bottles him up. And then you've got receivers like Marquise Brown, who is probably going to be the primary focus in this offense as far as receiving core. Volume will be there, 8.9 targets per game, 6.63 yards per target, 3 touchdowns. Did have an 11.3 yard ADOT. Oops. I hate when it brings us back here. I got to figure out a better scrolling mechanism for this. 11.3 yard ADOT. So the deep threat on this team is also their primary receiver, which is always something that's interesting for fantasy when you get the main target being a guy who can take the top off the defense, score you a deep touchdown. That's always interesting. But again, Josh Dobbs throwing to him. They're not really trying to win games. Going to be pretty ground focused, pretty heavy attack on in the running game. Let's see. Ertz, knee injury last year. May not be back, may not be ready. 4 touchdowns, 7.39 yards per target, 6.9 targets per game when healthy. Trey McBride, decent week 17 game that probably lingers in people's memory, 78 yards and a touchdown. Overall, McBride had a 6.79 yards per target, 265 yards and a TD, 6.1 yard ADOT, 4 yards after the catch. 3.3 targets a game, only saw 67% of the snaps, but obviously that went up in those later games. Mixed bag as far as the balanced receivers here. Michael Wilson, rookie after being a 5th-year senior, played 6 games, effective for yard after the catch and broken tackles. 3rd round pick, 94th overall, starting in 2 wide sets. So I think that's somewhat interesting. If you're going to stacks of this team, he would be included there for sure. A lot of mixed and matched parts. Cheap guys. Nothing really going down through here, though. Ertz, Moore, Connor. Who else did I miss? I guess overall the question is, like, do you even want to stack this team? And really, they're a low priority stack at best. Dobbs again in the limited action last year. 2 passing touchdowns. 7.7 intended air yards per pass attempt. 6 yards per pass attempt. Pretty limited option. Going on the other side, Sam Howell taking the QB reins. 4,900, very, very cheap on DK. They're pretty decent favorites. They should score. They've got weapons through the air. I think it's an okay play. It's not really a strong play, but for value, it's there. Terry McLaurin, as somebody just points out in the chat, Trey McKelly, not Trey McLaurin. It's too many Terrys, too many Treys, too many mix going on in this conversation right now. So McLaurin, obviously premium skill set, a little bit banged up, was dealing with turf toe, but he's confirmed to be in. We'll see how limited he is. And as Trey mentions, liking Jahan Dotson there, I do think that's an interesting alternative. Both of the receivers are pretty good deep threats. McLaurin last year, 1,191 yards, 5 touchdowns, a 12.8 yard ADOT, 5.1 yards again, 5.1 yards after the catch. So a premium deep threat against a team that is not going to be trying at all on defense. He only needs a few deep looks, convert on one of them, a couple other catches over the middle, and pad the stats a little bit. And you've got a decent day going for a pretty fair price, 64, 6,900. Not one of your highest price receivers on the board for his skill set. That's not bad at all. So I don't mind the Terry McLaurin play at all. And then you get to Dotson. Dotson gave you a 13.5 yard ADOT last year. So he was getting a deeper average depth of target. 8.57 yards per target, gave you 7 TDs. He was every bit as good as McLaurin last year, except for, obviously shorter yards, but more TDs, deeper looks. Yards after the catch, McLaurin blows him away. A lot more skill there. 5.1 yards after the catch per reception versus 3.9. But both of these guys, deep threats. Dotson played 100% of Howell's snaps during the preseason. Pretty much outplayed McLaurin in a lot of instances last year, though. So 2 skilled receivers there. He gets a decent running back receiver to work with, Antonio Gibson coming out of the backfield. Gibson last season, 3.9 targets a game, 13 touches overall a game. Didn't give you too much in terms of his rushing. 3 yards a game on the ground, but giving you 6.09 yards per target, 353 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, 6.5 yards after the catch per catch. Options like Curtis Samuel, Diami Brown, more specifically Logan Thomas is interesting there, but Curtis Samuel going to be their primary slot weapon. It's going to be a Chiefs-style offense with the new offensive coordinator. That's the expectation, so should be some looks for him in that set. 5.4 targets a game last year, 71% of the snaps, 7.13 yards per target, 4 TDs on 7 air yards per, 7 yards of ADOT, 3.2 yards after the catch. That was Curtis Samuel. So an effective slot weapon in this offense. I think you definitely include him in your groups. You include him in your builds. He's the lowest priority out of the 3 prime wide receivers in this offense, but he's definitely on the board. He'll be less popular than the others. And once you get into this kind of a price range, and you're just looking at some of these third wide receivers, fourth man on the depth chart who's going to get a little bit of action, or guys with specific roles, you get him in the end zone, you're touchdown hunting, it makes a difference. So I think Curtis Samuel's on the board at least for that much. Logan Thomas probably picks up some value gain, just assuming that they're going to be running that Chiefs-type offense that obviously had a pretty big tight end role in it. 5.3 yards per target, only 1 touchdown, 323 yards in limited action last year. Very, very cheap. So an interesting option there. Mix and match guys the rest of the way. I don't think there's any other priorities that I missed going through that. So as far as the defenses go, I do think the Commanders' defense, obviously very playable. They're ranked at the top of the board on a lot of sites. They're one of the leading projected defenses overall. They're fairly expensive defensively. For defense, my approaches are twofold. I typically will go either I'm just going to book a cheap defense, the cheapest one that I think is reasonably viable. I'll take a total punt defense that just costs absolutely nothing if I have to. Otherwise, if I've built out a lineup successfully, this is when I'm hand building or just like, monkeying around to see what fits with what, which is I do quite a bit more for NFL than anything else, by the way. A lot of the time defense just falls to is what it is. Whatever fits, I'll take. Obviously, we're looking for teams that aren't playing ridiculously good teams. We're looking for teams that are favored. Teams going against bad teams is obviously preferable. Great pricing. There's a lot of different decision points that go into it, but ultimately defense is my lowest priority position in any given lineup build, so I'll take what I get. If a team is ludicrously over-owned, even if they're in a good situation, especially when they're expensive, kind of like I expect Washington to be tomorrow, I don't really need to go to that defense all that often. I'll take what I get of it, but it's not a priority. No defense has really become major priorities for me. Michael Knack, struggling in his home league. Dotson or Deontay? I like both those receivers. I think Deontay's criminally underrated for his talent for what he's done in the past. Anything missed from this one, or can we move on? I think we can move on. One game down. Look at us go. Hopefully some more interesting ones to come. Atlanta and Carolina, a little bit closer of a total. Atlanta 3.5-point favorites, 40-point total overall. Carolina looks like these were about the same. Now I'm trying to judge how far off these implied totals are. Carolina somewhere around 18 implied points. Falcons around 21.5. Moderate scoring expected in this one. Neither one of these offenses is what I'd call good, great, exceptional, interesting. But I think there's a few interesting plays on this one. Taking a look at some of the notes. Carolina 18th ranked defense, DVOA projected. 30th ranked offense, DVOA projection. That tells you a lot about what you need to know there. 18-10 on the other side for Atlanta. 18th ranked by offensive DVOA projection. 10th ranked defensive DVOA projection is at least somewhat interesting, I guess. Especially when you're throwing them up against Carolina. Potentially a playable defense. 4,500 on FanDuel. We don't have the DK price in here right now. Middle projection. My defense projections are a little bit low, by the way. I got to see how I can figure out to put another point into the equation so that they balance out to make sense with the way that other people project defense. I don't want it to look too odd. Like we're riding with anything in our model. Like we've got Kirk Cousins a couple points ahead of other people, and anywhere where we're different from industry projections and industry consensus, I'm happy to let it ride. I think that's the only thing to make football projections any unique at all is to actually take stands. What I'm talking about here is just there's somehow in the collective defensive projections there's like a point missing for everybody versus the industry averages. But assuming you're using the same set, it doesn't really matter, because everybody's missing the same amount. I think that everybody else just puts a factor in there for trying to guesstimate based on like the implied team total of what the total on the other side will be, and I didn't do that. Mine's more purely based on the actual scoring factors. Anywho, plotting pace, run focused teams for the most part. You kind of air it out a little bit on the Atlanta side, I think. You got some interesting options in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, to a lesser degree, your Matt Collinses of the world. Desmond Ridder, limited opportunities in his 4 starts, 4 rushing attempts per game with 4 yards per attempt in those, 2 TDs passing in his 4 games, 7.80 implied air yards per attempt, 6.20 yards per pass attempt. Limited, but a lot to work with in terms of this offense. How's Drake London? Drake London, their lead receiver, 6.9 targets per game on 78% of their snaps, 7.4 yards per target, 10.4 yard ADOT. Decent deep threat here. Get me over to here. Pitts also a 13.8 yard ADOT for a tight end is pretty compelling. 2 touchdowns last year, 4.5 yards after the catch. I don't mind the Pitts play at all. Tore his MCL last year. Underperforming expectations after a 1,000-yard rookie season, but that was partly with Mariota in a run-heavy offense. So I like the spot for Kyle Pitts to kind of come roaring back, at least on the upside for his talent. If he goes a little bit under-owned, so much the better. Two-headed monster in terms of the running game for Atlanta. They drafted Bijan Robinson. He's expected to be the lead guy primarily. I see it as more of maybe a two-headed situation. I'm not sure that I want to rush into that one. I didn't draft Bijan Robinson anywhere in the limited season-long drafts that I did. Felt like he was getting a little bit of hype a little bit early. Algier was good last year, 1,000-yard season. Possible value for some touchdown upside, if nothing else. Should see a little bit of volume for sure. Last year, 14.1 touches a game, 4.9 yards per rush attempt, 3 touchdowns. Limited in the passing game, one receiving touchdown, 139 yards, 8.18 yards per target, but mostly taking the ball on a screen and running it out of the backfield. But he was productive last year. He's only 54 on both sites. A playable part at running back, I think. I think some of these backup guys, some of these guys in dual-headed roles, people tend to not go to the second guy in dual-headed roles a lot, and I don't think that that's necessarily justified in all situations. Of course, Bijan Robinson is supremely talented. I think he's going to be really, really popular here, though. Just given his popularity, first-round draft pick value in season-long drafts, people were all over this player in season-long. I expect they're going to go to him for the first week of DFS here. 1,580 yards with 18 touchdowns rushing, 314 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 16.5-yard average on 19 receptions in his 12 games at Texas last year. Obviously a premium high-end kid, but first game in the league against the defense that doesn't projects like lower middle of the league, but not the worst defense in the world. I don't know. I see it more two-headed. I think Algier gets in there and gets a little bit of attention. Cordarrelle Patterson, I don't think is going to play. Seemed like he's a little too banged up. Was questionable, but at best, Cordarrelle's the third man on the depth chart right now. He's dealing with a hamstring. Seems like he's not going to go. Last year overall, 2.4 targets a game, 12.7 touches a game, 11.1 yards. 11.1 rush attempts, 4.8 yards per rush attempt, and 8 TDs. No touchdowns through the air. He was effective when he got the ball in his hands. He's always cheap. He can make things happen. He's a dynamic guy on the field. But we've hit that a couple times over time now, and it might be time to let it go by. Michael Knack says, T. McBee, why is your content, visuals, and breakdowns the best in the business? Visuals is because it's easy. You do what a lot of people do, steal. I stole a lot of my dashboard look and feels and, how I just put things together from our pal Josh Engelman over at Stochastic. Not the actual models or anything that's, the data or anything like that. But just especially the baseball model. I've talked about this on the baseball show a ton of times. Those 2 little windows there, if you go back 5 years ago, that's Josh's view. That is exactly how he set it up, and I stole that completely, and I've thanked him for it a number of times, and I'll do it again. Thank you to our pal Josh for teaching me how to make a somewhat visible dashboard. Not teaching me directly, but just by virtue of doing it on his shows. So presentation-wise, kudos to him. Data-wise, breakdown-wise, partly because I'm probably a little bit crazy, a little bit over the top. I can't do things half-assed. I can leave them and procrastinate on them like crazy. That's why we're doing the show on Saturday night instead of casually day by day, position by position, like I talked about doing, which will hopefully start next week. But yeah, I'm a really bad procrastinator, but I can't leave things half-assed. So once I get into it, I get into it. I've got detailed notes, bullet points on literally every player on this slate. And I need a nap. But thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. Obviously, I know that you weren't asking an actual question, but I felt like answering it anyway. Commanders are second on the boom bust tool somewhere, it sounds like. Interesting. Jake Swales thinks that Bryce Young is a prime candidate to get Tua'd. Yikes. That's not what anybody wants. Where were we? Outside of London on the receiving side of things, dealing with some limited options. Mac Hollins, kind of a mix-in. 4 TDs, 690 yards. What kind of target share was he getting? 5.5 targets a game. 3.4 yards after the catch. A 12.7-yard ADOT is interesting. Kind of another deep threat on this team that already has 2 in Drake London and their tight end. So a lot of guys that are going to be, maybe potentially gunning. It would be nice if they had somebody a little bit better than Desmond Ridder to be throwing to them. But there's options there. Scotty Miller. This is probably first one of the day. Some of these still need to be. We'll catch all of these. I got to build a naming table for this thing. Hadn't gotten around to it yet. Scotty Miller, 185 yards, 4.63 yards per target. Not much. But another guy, 12.8 yard ADOT at least in that Tampa offense last year. He's cheap on both sites, but a limited down the depth chart option. Going back to the other side of this one on Carolina. Obviously, you've got the first overall pick. Not the greatest preseason in the world. Going up against a defense that is 10th ranked, again, by defensive DVOA projections. Last season at Alabama, 3,328 yards and 32 touchdowns in 12 games. In 2021, 15 games, 4,800 yards, 47 touchdowns. That's quite a few. Falcons were 31st in pass defense DVOA last year. So if that doesn't improve, they're probably not going to finish 10th in overall defensive DVOA for this year. And that could create a little bit of opportunity for Bryce Young. Kind of limited set of options around him. An aging Adam Thielen, 33 years old. Probably going to be the primary safety valve, the veteran, experienced guy that he can, he managed to slip away, come back to the quarterback because he knows he's in trouble kind of a thing, and he flips it out to him. And, Thielen will play that role. He's been banged up. He's questionable, so he might not even be out there. DJ Shark is already ruled out. So we get an opportunity for Jonathan Mingo, who I do like. He's on my list of potentially sneaky, interesting receivers. I dropped that into the Discord earlier. 3,200, very, 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 very cheap on the DK slate. 4,500, very cheap on FanDuel as well. Might be the only healthy option, the only fully healthy option in this passing attack. Played a lot with Bryce Young in the preseason. He's 6'2", 215 pounds, so he's a pretty decent physical specimen. 5 touchdowns and 861 yards in 13 games, 51 catches at Ole Miss last year. Playable part. Potentially a playable part that gets more interesting if you get Thielen ruled out. Then you're dealing with an offense that's going to have him, Terrace Marshall, Laviska Shenault. Marshall should probably get some looks. Shenault might. We're dealing with, again, really far down the depth chart options at this point. Last season, Marshall 3.6 targets a game. Shenault 2.5. Marshall did have a pretty good ADOT, 12.3 yards average depth target. Not bad. 5 yards after the catch per target, or per catch rather. 1 touchdown, 490 yards. 10.43 yards per target, though. Pretty good depth, pretty good scoring efficiency in terms of putting yards up when he catches the ball, when he happens to be targeted, if he happens to get on the field. Once we start stacking these variables, it's not like Showdown where I was saying, hey, we can go to the possible and not have to focus as much on the probable. We're back to with a little bit of possible in there. You do want, especially for these early ones, the massive 982 a million entries fields. You definitely want to focus on some of the darts, some of the it's possible plays, but these are also kind of low end receivers. So we're talking about low end receivers who may or may not see volume if they happen to work their way on the field. I just like the kid a little bit better. I'll take my shots with a cheaper Mingo. What else? DJ Shark's out. We talked about that. Oh, we didn't talk about the running game. Miles Sanders coming here. Basically taking over the lead back role. But they do have Chuba Hubbard there, who was at least somewhat interesting, filling in last year when he needed to. Last season, Hubbard 7.3 touches a game. Touches per game. 31.1 yards rushing, only 2 rushing touchdowns. 171 yards receiving, limited action. 1.2 targets a game. Miles Sanders put up his first 1,000-yard season. Going up against a Falcons rushing defense that was 27th in DVOA versus the run last year. Probably going to be a pretty rush-heavy attack. Sanders last season, 16.4 touches a game. 11 TDs. 74.6 rush yards a game. Broken tackles on 0.85% of his runs. 1.7 rush yards after contact per carry. Not really all that productive in the receiving game. 1.5 targets a game. 3 yards per target. Just kind of a dump-off option in that Philly offense. But a little bit of upside here, assuming that he's the primary guy. Assuming that he's healthy, he was banged up a little bit through camp. He had a groin injury. He's been practicing. Didn't play in the preseason, but he's been practicing. I think it's an interesting enough spot, and I think he's very fairly priced. 56.69, that's pretty much a nothing price. He projects out fairly well here, so I do think he's a playable part of this offense. I think he doesn't necessarily want to be in the groups, in the stacks. He's more of a standalone guy out on his own. So you're not necessarily saying like, all right, I want Bryce Young, Miles Sanders, and Jonathan Mingo in my Carolina lineup, and then Kyle Pitts coming back the other way. That's not necessarily the greatest version of this construction. I'd probably rather just go like Bryce Young and Jonathan Mingo on one side of it, and then Drake London or Kyle Pitts on the other side of it, and then leave that other spot open. Just take my value plays out of this stack. You don't always have to be double stacking by any means. I actually typically prefer to single stack. I like the thin stacks, the skinny stacks, as they say. Thielen, we talked about that. Just looking down my notes here. It is a semi two-headed attack with Kuba Hubbard there, but most of the volume is going to go in Sanders' direction, we have to think. Talked about all these guys. Hayden Hurst going up against the Falcons D that was bottom 5 versus tight ends in fantasy scoring last year. Could see looks, it's a common thing in football parlance that rookie tight ends rely on, or rookie quarterbacks rather rely on their tight ends. We'll see whether or not that comes through true in this situation, but it could. He's going to have some options like that to work with. It could. Hurst, very cheap at $3,000 on DK. $5,000 on FanDuel seems a little bit unreasonable. 5 targets a game last year. Gave us 2 TDs, 4.9 yard ADOT, so he's just kind of hanging around the line of scrimmage a lot of the time. 3.7 yards after the catch, not really giving you all that much downfield, just kind of catches the ball, and wherever he happens to be, that's where he happens to be. Mixed bag the rest of the way. I don't think you need to tangle with the Carolina defense. Not really getting a ton of respect. Maybe the Atlanta defense gets a little bit interesting, just given rookie's first game. Limited options, especially if like Thielen's out as well. Very limited options offensively. But they weren't a great defense last year by any means. Think that one covers this one pretty well. Neither one of these teams top priority for me, but there are interesting options. Let's move on to an actually interesting game. Cincinnati. 48-point total in this one. Tight ball game, too. Cleveland 1-point dogs at home. This is the kind of game we're looking for. Good high-end total. Skilled players on both sides. Interesting options on both sides. And a tight point spread. When you can pile on like division rivals and blah, 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 blah. So much the better and all that and important games and yada, yada, yada. That's always good for stacking as well when it's a high total on the board. But anytime I can get a high total between 2 semi-talented teams that it should be playing a close game, that's one where I want to focus. And this is a game that fits that to a T. Joe Burrow on one side, Deshaun Watson on the other side. Watson was awful in his return last year. 6 games down the stretch last year. Just bad overall. He was... Come here. He gave us 6 rush attempts per game. 4.9 yards per rush attempt, 1 rushing touchdown. He gave us 7.1 intended air yards per pass attempt, 6.5 yards per pass attempt, 7 passing touchdowns in 6 games. Just wasn't really productive. Wasn't the guy that we were all missing for multiple seasons. 3 amazing years with Houston for DFS purposes. In 2020, 4,823 yards passing with 33 touchdowns. Ran for 444 more yards with 7 touchdowns. Did fumble the ball 10 times, lost 3 of them. He's a complete wild card. He's on my season-long, the keeper team, the super draft team that I've mentioned. He was one of my quarterback keepers. I'm fairly invested. I do think it's an interesting spot. I think he's got all the talent in the world. We'll see whether it's still there. But I think there's a lot of ceiling there. And I think for the price, $6,000 on the DK slate in particular, that's a really compelling price. That's a really cheap price. Not a ton of daylight between his projections and the Joe Burrow projections on the other side. Couple of points, but not crazy. Especially if you get to show him using his legs, getting into the end zone maybe. There's a lot of upside there. He's going to be going up against a Cincinnati defense that is projected to be the 25th ranked defense by DVOA. Second ranked offense. Supports the idea that there's going to be some action back and forth. On the Cleveland side, Cleveland 7th projected offense DVOA, 8th projected defensive DVOA. Not your grandpa's Cleveland Browns. Not EMAC Cleveland Browns. Those are the Baltimore Ravens now. Interesting skill players on both sides of this one. Not to bury Joe Burrow, by the way. Hurt in the preseason. Calf might limit his rushing. He is a underrated rusher when he has to be. But I'm really here for his arm for the most part, especially when it comes to hitting some of these premium receivers that we like so much. So I don't really mind that much if Joe Burrow's not going to run the ball all that much. 4.7 rush attempts per game, 16.1 rush yards per game, 5 rushing touchdowns last year. More of can run the ball into the end zone than anything else. If you lose that, it's a minor ding, but we're not looking at Joe Burrow as like one of these scrambling type quarterbacks, so I'm perfectly fine with just using him as a passer here, and I think we're getting that out of him. Browns last year were 12th by pass DVOA, so even last year their defense was pretty stout, and this year again projected to get a little bit better. But it is Joe Burrow. We are talking about a premium quarterback with premium plus options in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. Even Irv Smith is a somewhat interesting tight end. I think Andre Iosivas. It's the first time I ever said it out loud. Andre Iosivas. Bear with me on some of these college guys, by the way. I've told you guys before, college football, no bandwidth for it. But definitely getting to know these guys as they come into the league, and I've got all their college numbers and everything as I went through it. But some of the new names, going to take me a minute. So I think we're going to stacks of both of these teams. They're both going to be at least one setups where I can take one, I can take two from either team. So a Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd kind of a stack. A Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd kind of a stack to dance around the ownership while still capturing upside is in play. Like I said before, though, I kind of tend to prefer the skinny stacks. I like the ones where I can go like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase just to make it simple, and then take some Amari Cooper coming back the other way to make it the most straightforward possible one. But as other versions of that, you could go like, I like the Joe Burrow, Tyler Boyds for 41.54 with maybe a David Njoku coming back on the other side and the tight end role, and you go touchdown hunting with David Njoku. There's a lot of different ways to put these things together. If you do that in that build and you get the two touchdown game out of Njoku from the cheap, low-owned tight end, and you get 2 touchdowns or a touchdown and a decent yardage total from a guy like Tyler Boyd, who will be the third highest owned out of these 3 receivers, even though he's at a significantly cheaper price. If he goes off, that sets you on your way. That lineup is doing damage. So I do like doing that, especially when it's like value guy, and then I can spend up at two premium running backs. I can spend up for a premium receiver in the third wide receiver spot that I've got open, or the flex, wherever you want it. But I do like creating situations that allow big chips to fall into the thing that I've built. Like I said, I'm weaving a loose basket, a net, whatever you want to call it, and then I'm throwing it underneath the chalk, throwing it underneath the prime chips, and just letting those drop into their slots. I think it's a really effective way to build lineups. When we're looking at the receivers on the Cincinnati side, I kind of breezed through them all just because everybody knows who these guys are. Let's see. We can start with Jamar Chase, I guess. Pretty decent starting point with 10.3 targets a game last year. Give us 1,046 receiving yards, 9 receiving touchdowns, a 9-yard average depth of target. T. Higgins also getting deep targets, 10.9-yard average. Biggest out of the prime receivers. But Tyler Boyd not far behind at 9.2 yards of average depth. Yards per target are pretty high for both T. Higgins and Boyd. They get a little bit more action deep, where Jamar Chase is just more the primary, so 7.81 yards per target. No slouch by any means for yardage. Led the 3 for touchdowns. But all 3 of these guys got in the end zone a fair amount of the time. 5 TDs for Boyd as the third man. That's not bad. Decent yards after the catch type numbers. Going down to Iosivas. 6'3", drafted 206th overall, so not a lot of draft capital. When we're looking for these rookies, we do like to see the guys where it's like, we spent a third-round pick to get this guy. He might be little coach speak. We're going to slot him in third, fourth on the depth chart, but really we know that he's going to be more prime than that because they spent the second, third-round pick on him. Those are the guys I like to hunt for in that situation. But I do think Isivis has a little bit of skill here. He's a big-time deep threat in college. Going to be low-owned. Going to be cheap, 3,000, 4,000. I didn't actually put his college numbers here. First one I got to look up. I was going to give you guys the exact... bear with me one sec. I thought I had these... I thought I had booked his, but I didn't. I just want to see the actual numbers that... where the hell is... sportsreference.com from the people who bought you baseball reference and football reference and so on and so forth. Oh, why is he not coming up? Oh, because there's a space after his name. He's still not coming up. This is a waste of time. There we go. Found it. 943 yards on 66 catches, 7 touchdowns. Interesting enough. For his career, he had 16 touchdowns, 1,909 yards. Not bad. Fast, decent frame, and interesting enough body to throw to. So just somebody who's kind of in the mix as one of those very cheap, low-owned darts that I was talking about. Obviously, when we look at the projection, we're not projecting this kid to go out there and catch 10 balls. But in the Rashee Rice, get me a couple looks, get me in the end zone. You've got a clear skill set. You've got a big body. I think he's on the board. Might not even see the field. You don't know. But probably a couple of looks. Let me get back to where I was. Told you there's going to be a lot of awkward clicking around while I figure out where these things are. On the Cleveland side of things, let me finish off the Cincinnati side. I'll just go through the team. Joe Mixon, obviously a prime rusher. Maybe a little bit more rush volume if Burrow's not actually 100%, but I expect at least his arm's going to be fine, so I imagine they're going to be throwing and pretty much on track for normal volume. But Mixon's a lead running back. Cleveland was 26th ranked rush DVOA last year. Gave up nearly 2,000 yards and 17 touchdowns to running backs last year. Mixon was among them. I don't have the specifics of what he did against them. 2 touchdowns receiving, 441 receiving yards, 5.88 yards per target last year, with a 7.8 yard after the catch. And that's on a negative 0.2, so catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage and making things happen with most of his touches through the air. 7 rushing touchdowns last year. 3.9 yards per rush attempt, 19.3 touches a game, 5 targets a game. Lot of volume for Joe Mixon. One of your go-to bell cow type backs for sure. You've got Chris Evans there now, more likely to fill that Samaje Perine role. Perine, whatever. He was on the team the last 2 years. Didn't see much action. 17 carries and 15 catches on 17 targets for 151 and 2 TDs in 14 games in 2021. 12 games last year, no carries, 3 catches on 4 targets, 38 yards and a touchdown. So probably just going to step into that third down back, receiving back kind of a role. Maybe a little bit when he needs to spell Joe Mixon for a couple of carries, but not a primary option. Not a guy I'm really going to chase very much in Chris Evans. Chase Brown came in out of Illinois. 5th round pick, also in that mix for some additional touches, some passing game action. 1,600 yards and 10 touchdowns at Illinois, but that was on 329 carries. That's a lot of work. So kind of a compiler, but those numbers are good. 5th round pick, though, not a lot of draft equity going into him. The rushing game on the Cleveland side, Outside of Deshaun, obviously, who can run the ball as a quarterback, we've got Nick Chubb, another guy who is just a bell cow of a running back, the primary and an easy go-to option. He's another guy that I don't necessarily want to have in my stacks where I'm looking for quarterback and pass catcher. I like to leave him. He'll fall into some of my Deshaun Watson builds for sure, just because of how he's projected, where he's priced. We'll have room for him, and he'll drop into some of them. But I don't really force him in there because then I would get a lot of lineups, given how he projects competitively with all these guys. I would get a lot of lineups with like Deshaun, Nick Chubb combinations. And Chubb, for all his talent, 2.2 targets a game last year, not the biggest receiving option in the world. 239 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, 9.6 yards after the catch, catching the ball at the line of scrimmage, basically 6.46 yards per target. It's just not what he's really there for. 19.5 yards per or 19.5 touches per game, 5 yards per rush attempt, 89.7 yards per game, and 12 TDs. That's what he's there for. He's there to smash. I like the spot for Nick Chubb, 82-86, going up against Cincinnati. No Hunt in the situation anymore, so now he's got Jerome Ford, he's got Pierre Strong. Jerome Ford, 2022 pick, returned kicks, but only 8 carries, got a little pass catching skills last year. Pierre Strong, also a 2022 pick. He was acquired in a trade. He was a 4th round pick by the Pats. Fast, good athlete, explosive kind of a guy. Could potentially move into the second spot behind Chubb as like the primary backup. But neither of these guys has a really clear-cut role, and he's just so dominant. Unless you get a situation where he's banged up, has to come out of the game, I don't think either of these guys sees all that much. Neither one of them projects out all that well, all that usable. So just kind of spare parts here. Probably not going to have either of those guys in my pool. And a lot of these guys, when we get down to this level where we're talking about the 3rd string running backs, you can be pretty comfortable to take them out of your pool. If you get a share here or there, it's fine. Low end, extreme dart throw. But in a tournament with, I know FanDuel's got like 952,000 entries in it. So in that size tournament, you do need something crazy to happen probably. That was the Cleveland ground game. That leaves the Cleveland passing game. Amari Cooper, high-end option, going to be the primary option for Deshaun Watson. Not something I put faith in, but apparently, according to one of the notes that I read around the industry, thank you to everybody that I had notes around the industry and a lot of valuable content out there. One of the ones that I actually really recommend you guys give a quick read to, and you'll probably recognize a couple notes where I'm paraphrasing and, obviously not directly taking their information, but, taking little snippets from here and there. Fantasy Pros did a really deep player-by-player breakdown. We're going a little deeper on this one. They didn't include a lot of these later in the depth chart guys. But for a lot of the primary plays, a lot of the guys who are like the main focuses, going to get 80% of the snaps, so on and so forth, they did a really good job breaking down the slate. It's for season-long. It's got that season-long focus. But just for player notes, getting a feel for where everything is, Fantasy Pros did a really good job with their just week 1 overview. So I want to give those guys a little bit of a shout. So Amari Cooper. The thing that I was going to get to there that I don't really care about, but it was an interesting note. Apparently much better in home games. Who knew? I don't really care about stuff like that. But there it is. Football field's pretty much the same wherever you go. Home environment gets the crowd. They love him. I don't know. He's a guy who's moved around a little bit in his career. I don't know how much faith I put in something like that. What I put faith in is his talent. 8.79 yards per target, 1,160 yards last year, 9 TDs, 4.2 yards after the catch, 12.1 yard ADOT, pretty solid there. Elijah Moore coming over to this team now, 11.7 yard ADOT, 3.1 after the catch, only 1 touchdown last year, 446 yards. Not that good in terms of the output, but a talented guy. Underperformed when he was with the Jets. 5 touchdowns in 11 games, 443 of 77 receptions, and 538 yards total. Cleveland has said that they're going to come out and they're going to use him almost in like a Debo from a couple years ago role, where he's a receiver, but he's also going to see some carries out of the backfield, kind of a hybrid, just a weapon type guy. Cordell Patterson is another guy that comes to mind for that type of a role. Keep an eye on Elijah Moore. Not the least interesting guy in this offense by any means. Peoples-Jones, medium talent. 5.6 targets a game. Decent ADOT at 11.7 yard ADOT. Only 3 TDs, 839 yards, 8.7 yards per target. Kind of a mix-in guy, 4,300, 5,900. He's certainly certainly effectively priced. More so on DK. That's a pretty effective DK price. Definitely in the mix for shares with Deshaun Watson. More of a second banana in my stack. Like I've gotten my Watson and Cooper. I've got my Watson with Cooper and more. I've got my Watson and more. Now I want my Watson, Cooper, and Njoku. So he's like the fourth guy on that pecking order. But eventually we'll get to the level where I'm going to get some shares of Watson, Cooper, or Watson, Moore, and Peoples-Jones as that next guy in. Maybe a couple with Watson, Peoples-Jones as the only receiver. I don't know how many Watson, Peoples-Jones, and Njoku I want. We're getting a little bit thinner there. You want to have one of the primary targets most of the time. But Peoples-Jones is on that list. Said Tillman. Down here, 3,200, 4,400. Low projected. 6'3" rookie. 12 touchdowns at Tennessee in 2021. Hurt with an ankle in 2022. Interesting enough. Low owned, probably. Kind of a dart from down the depth chart a little bit. But 6'3" gives me a little bit of size. Minor amount of skill. 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns at Tennessee in 2021. That's not bad. I'll take it for a dart. I think he's on the board. Tight ends. Njoku, I do like, just in terms of his talent. He's never all that expensive. 4,256 is perfectly fine. 5.7 targets a game last year. Gave us 4 TDs, 628 yards, 7.85 yards per target. Decent little yard after the catch. Only a 6.5 yard ADOT is tight end. You take what you get there. Limited backup tight end in Harrison Bryant. I don't think he's really all that playable here. Fourth year, three touchdowns in the first 2, then just 1 last year on the most targets of his career, which was 42. But kind of a limited option. 2,500, 4,500. At least he's very, very low priced. But you're just purely guy that might get 2 looks, 3 targets a game last year. Let's call it 3. Does he get one of those in the end zone? Does he break one of those for a big, long touchdown? Pretty limited. Irv Smith on the Cincinnati side. I left him out. I briefly blew past him. Talented guy, injuries, depth chart issues the last couple of years. Former second rounder 4 years ago. Cleveland limited tight end scoring a little bit last year. Irv saw 4.5 targets a game. Gave us 2 TDs, 5.06 yards per target. Limited overall, but a playable part of that stack, if nothing else. He's cheap at 36.49. I like this game a lot for scoring on both sides. I like this game a lot for stacking. There's plenty of offensive weapons here. I don't think we go to either one of these defenses all that often. Neither one, the Cleveland D, I guess, would be the more appealing between the two, but not against Cincinnati, not with a 48-point total in a close game. This is more of a spot for offense, I think. Would it knock me out of my chair if Cleveland went out, had a good game defensively, kept Cincinnati a little bit more limited, they don't totally go off? It would be somewhat surprising. Cincinnati's a really good offense and Vegas likes it. But I could see a path to that success. It's not going to keep me away from Burrow stacks, though. Stacks on both sides of this one. Watson, Burrow. Again, everything drives through the quarterback position. Just make your quarterback decision. That informs a lot of the rest of your lineup. You're getting at least two other positions just from the correlated. Sometimes 3. You're eliminating defenses. After you've made your decisions, you're eliminating players from the pool by, I'm not going to take a third guy from that same team. It leaves only certain positions and only certain salary avenues open, which does create a situation where after you've gone to, let's say, a super popular option like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. After you've gone to an option like that and you build in, let's say, another super popular avenue like Amari Cooper coming back the other way. Or even a Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is a high enough volume running back where I'm happy to get him in my run back situation against a Joe Burrow stack, but not necessarily as part of Watson stacks, like I was saying before. I hope that makes sense. But if you take those options, now you've spent a fairly significant amount of money. You've blocked off, all right, I've got my quarterback, I've got one of my skill players on that team, I've got one of my skill players on the other side, 2 out of my 3 wideouts. Now I'm going to have very specific amounts of money to spend on my running back positions, which then leads me to only having a certain amount of money for like a value wideout, my flex position, a value tight end in defense. So if after you've made those obvious decisions, you make just one alternate decision, spend a little more, spend a little less, leave a little money on the table, something to just get you slightly more far afield from the most common decisions that'll be made around those initial selections. A lot of people are just going to blindly go, all right, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Amari Cooper. I know enough that I know that I want to stack and I want a guy running back against it. Now I'm going to put in the cheap defense, and now I've got this to spend, so that gives me these two running backs, and everybody's making those same decisions, and then they get to that last lineup spot, and it's all right, I've got $5,000 to spend. I can go to this guy for exactly $5,000. Boy, that lineup looks pretty. I feel good about that lineup. But everybody else has made that exact same decision because that's the guy at the top of the list who cost that exact amount of money that was left there. If you drop down from the $5,000 guy to an equal talent for $4,700, leave $300 on the table. You've made a completely different decision that's going to get you just one step further away from the field. And that's key in these massive field tournaments. I think we talked about this one kind of up and down. Went through the receiving cores on both sides. Like this game a lot. Let's keep it rolling. 3 games down. Thank you, Wes. I appreciate that, buddy. Wes says great stuff as always. Thank you, pal. Glad you showed up. Glad you're here hanging out with us. Jeremy Savage, Evaldi started hot, started sweating. Did he blow up? How deep did he pitch? 2 1/3? Sounds about right. Not paying attention to what's going on in baseball. I did end up throwing one lineup in. I left my phone in the other room. That's annoying. Nothing I need it for. Yeah, nothing. Nothing's going to lock. I don't need to put in any placeholders while we're on the show, so we're good. Phone's in the other room. If anybody out there is trying to call me, any of my friends trying to text me or anything like that, I apologize. I'll get back to you after the show. Yeah, I did end up throwing in one lineup. I went with a Braves Pirates game stack. One of the Andersons, Chase Anderson on the hill against Cleveland, and Juan Soto one-off. So the 4-3-1, not comfortable. Didn't like it at all. No idea how it's doing. Green Bay Packers, Chicago Bears, 41-point total. Chicago favored by a point at home. This game's always interesting. Division rivals. Obviously, a lot of history here. Change of the guard in the Green Bay side of things with Jordan Love taking the reins at quarterback after what's-his-name was around for quite a while. That was great, that little exchange with Rodgers on Hard Knocks. I'm sure you guys saw it. Just telling the guy knocked him down or gave him a shove after a couple seconds after he threw the ball. And he just started going, I don't even know who you are. I've never heard of you. The guy tried to come back and say, I don't know who you are. It's like, dude, have you not been watching football for the last 20 years? 15 years, 10 years, whatever it's been? But he's not here anymore. Jordan Love's taken over. Jordan Love's been around. He loses Christian Watson this week, which is kind of a downgrade. He did play 6 games in 2021, threw 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions on 62 attempts, 27 yards and 12 rush attempts, fumbled the ball 3 times. They traded up for him in the 2020 draft. We did say whenever we get a little draft equity, it's a couple years ago now, obviously, but this was the plan. Have him understudy for a couple of years, give him the reins. 7.20 intended air yards per target, 9.3 yards per pass attempt, 1 touchdown in extremely limited action last season. He's not going to have his top option on the field today. That's the big story here. No Christian Watson. Has a big downstream effect. He's also dealing with a lot of injured receivers. Romeo Doubs is questionable, might not play. Dontavian Wicks is questionable, might not play. That's going to create some opportunities. We've got some interesting receivers on this team. If we go depth chart hunting, I think Jaden Reed could be interesting. 2nd round pick. We'll get into the specifics, but it's not the greatest receiver core given some of the absences for Jordan Love to work with in his first game here. Fortunately, he's got Aaron Jones on his side. Jones projects out great for me here. He's also got A.J. Dillon to work with. Those 2 guys split good games against this Bears team last year. I prefer the Aaron Jones side of it, but like I said earlier, there is value, especially when they're highly projected like this. This is a good running back projection. This is a better running back projection, but this is easily playable, especially at the price and lower ownership. When you get a 2-headed situation like this, I never mind going to the second banana, especially when it's really like a 1-1A type situation. Jones is maybe a little bit more than 1-1A. It's like 1-1B, but it's a good two-headed situation. Chicago, 27th ranked offensive DVOA projected, 31st ranked defensive DVOA projected, 32nd last year defensive DVOA. So should be plenty of opportunity for the Packers to at least create a little bit of offense here. It could be a higher total. I think if we had a more proven quarterback on the Green Bay side with all of his weapons and just a guy who's generally more reliable as a passer than Justin Fields, we'd probably see a higher total. But then we'd obviously be talking about a wildly different game than the one that we've actually got. My point is that I do think there are skills on the board here. And I think both these teams, given that they're going up against limited to mediocre to bad defenses, it seems like there should be scoring for the skill players available. Green Bay, 17th ranked offensive DVOA, 16th defensive DVOA projected. They were 31st against the run last year. That leads into maybe a little bit of Khalil Herbert as the lead back. Not my favorite option on the board, but a little bit of talent there. Certainly feeds the idea of upside for Justin Fields, if nothing else, on the ground. Obviously, he's a primary weapon for this team. Gets it done in the air, gets it done on the ground, gets it done more on the ground. 7,700, 8,300 across sites. I think he's perfectly playable. 17 passing touchdowns last year, 9.1 intended air yards per pass attempt, 7.10 yards per pass attempt. 8 rushing touchdowns, 76.2 rush yards per game, 7.1 rush attempts per game. He's looking to take off. They have designed plays for him to take off and run the ball. He's a very, very dynamic quarterback. He's just got limitations in the passing game. Bears' offensive line is dinged up. Packers have been getting to him in their head-to-head games. A little bit of a pass rush for the Packers. Jordan Love's side, if we're talking about quarterbacks, talked about that, got through all those notes already. We already did that. I've got this one for some reason in a different order than the first 3 games were. So I'm just trying to process through my notes here. Let's jump into the running side of things. Well, actually, no. Let me go through the receivers. So Justin Fields does get DJ Moore to work with this year. Big playability. 7 touchdowns last year, 13-yard ADOT. Only 888 yards last year, 63 catches on 118 targets. Big target volume. That was still there. 6.9 targets per game. 2.9 yards after the catch, 7.53 yards per target. Didn't totally fulfill the volume expectations, the yardage expectations. Prior to last year, he had 3 straight years of 1,100 yards or better. But the 7 touchdowns is actually a career high. I think it's an interesting option. He's only 61, 63. Yeah, he's got Fields thrown to him. But a talented guy like that might bring out a better passer from Justin Fields. It could work the other way, right? It might not be that Justin Fields downgrades his talent by virtue of not being able to hit him with the ball. You get a good route runner, a good receiver, experienced guy like this, could really help out. So I like the option. I like the pairing. I think it's a very dynamic pairing. They're not all that crazy expensive. So DJ Moore, top option in the receiving game here for Chicago, obviously. Darnell Mooney, 11 games last year, fell short of expectations. Only 2 touchdowns last year, 81 catches on 140 looks. I got to pay attention to my punctuation. Had 4 TDs in each of his first 2 seasons. Went 81 for 140. 81 catches on 140 targets. 1,055 yards in 2021. That's decent production from a guy who's now priced at 4,500, 5,900. Last year, 5.5 targets a game. A 12-yard ADOT. 493 yards, 2 touchdowns. Maybe a mid-type talent guy. But somebody that's going to look to take the top off the defense, somebody that's going to probably get a couple of deep targets. Those are the guys we're hunting for. Anybody who's on the board to get deep targets at cheap prices and a little bit lower ownership than the primary receivers on the board, it's a spot to go to, especially in a somewhat dynamic offense like this. So I don't mind the Darnell Mooney spot. Chase Claypool. He was a deep option for me in season long. He's very cheap on DK at 3,400. Had a hamstring issue in camp. Came back. Supposedly he's full speed, whatever that means. 5.3 targets a game last year. 1 receiving touchdown, 451 yards. A 10.3 yard ADOT. Again, anybody who's cheap, anybody who's going to get under-owned, ignored, Anybody where there's a little bit of just industry bias against a guy who underperformed, or a guy who's got perceptions of not being a good player, guys who's moved out of situations, whatever reason people don't want to go to guys, when there's clear talent there, when they've done it in years past, when there's upside for deep targets, a little bit of volume, these are the sneaky slate winning type guys. I'm not saying Chase Claypool is going to go out and win a slate, but I do think there's upside there. Going down the depth chart, Tyler Scott, 3,000, 4,000. Rookie out of Cincinnati. Undersized by a little bit, 5'10". 133rd overall pick, probably more of a return man. I think he's won the return job. Maybe gets a couple of looks. He's really fast. 4.3, 240 time. That's blazing speed. Get me that one deep shot. Maybe a guy who can bring back a punt. Maybe you get him in there with the Chicago defense if you decide to play the defense. Not my preferred strategy, playing the Chicago defense. But that is a viable approach. Try and pick off the return game score, the defensive scores. Not a high-end option. No promises of volume whatsoever for Tyler Scott. Tight end side of things, Cole Kmet. Good red zone efficiency, tons of routes. Basically a touchdown-dependent guy, though. 44-52, I think we can get him in the end zone. Not the craziest idea in the world. 7 TDs last year. 6.7 yard ADOT, 7.88 yards per target, 544. Not terrible as a tight end option. For cheap to pair with Justin Fields, I think that's viable. We're looking at a lot of guys that are going to extract value by getting those deep targets and scoring a touchdown, though. So with only so many touchdowns to go around, this is one of those teams where I'm not sure how many double stacks I want. I kind of primarily want my Bears in skinny stacks. Give me Justin Fields, especially because he's likely to run one in. Give me Justin Fields and one of these receivers, one of these pass catchers, and somebody from the other side. Robert Tonyan's also on this team now. 3.9 targets a game, 2 touchdowns, 470 yards, 7.01 yards per target. I don't know what to expect for the volume there. I don't think it's going to be much. Kmet is your primary in terms of the tight end. Touched on the Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon part of it. Jones ahead of the industry in our model by a little bit for fantasy points on both sites. Excellent pass catching back. Split backfield, but like I said, they kind of split having good games against this team just last year. For his part, Jones, 4.2 targets a game, 16 touches a game, 65.9 rush yards a game. Only 2 rushing touchdowns last year. Gave us an additional 5 through the air, though, 395 yards, 5.49 yards per target. That's an interesting receiving back. A.J. Dillon on his side of things, 2.5 targets a game, but 12.6 touches. Managed to get in the end zone 7 times on the ground. 10.9 yard rush attempts per game. 4.1 yards per rush attempt. Not as much involved in the passing game. No touchdowns, only 206 yards and limited targets. So you got your primary, who does also work through the air, and then a good ground game guy. 5,200, 6,100. I don't mind going to Dillon here in this spot. I think he's a totally viable guy. The thing I don't want to do is have both of those guys. So that's another rule that's in that article. I tend to block out maximum 1 running back from the same team. And like I said when we were talking about those rules, maximum 1 player from any given team when we're not dealing with either the stacking with their quarterback or against the opposing quarterback. And typically in that run back situation, I still only want 1 guy from the opposing team. Jalen Hurts. Jake Swales thinks Jalen Hurts will be the top scoring player on the slate. Wouldn't shock me at all. We talked about Khalil Herbert briefly, right? 10.6 touches a game. Got in the end zone 4 times. Just needs volume. A productive enough guy when he gets volume. Should be the lead back in that Bears offense. I forget whether I touched on him or skipped over him. Rashawn Johnson also on that team for rushing. 115th overall pick in last year's draft. Good blocker, probably going to be on the field a decent amount, but probably won't see a ton of volume overall. Pass catching and like pass game oriented guy, but might be out there for his blocking ability more than anything else. We talked just kind of tangentially about the receiving core for the Packers, so now we got to get into it. With Watson out, we've got Romeo Doubs would step into that role. He'd be the primary second-year man, 42 of 67 last year with 3 touchdowns, 425 yards. Should see volume, but he's injured. He's been banged up this week. He's currently questionable, at least as the last time I saw. If we don't get him, that's a little bit of a question mark. It starts to trickle downstream, so maybe we would start to look toward guys like Dontavian Wicks, 159th overall pick out of Virginia. Good size, good vertical. Potentially see limited targets, but he's also injured. Had a hamstring issue this week. Limited in practices. Probably going to go, but that doesn't necessarily bode well for the kid to get a bunch of additional looks if he's also somewhat limited. Jaden Reed was the second-round pick. Had a really good preseason. Should have plenty of volume. He's going to have volume either way, but should see a pretty significant amount, especially if there's no Romeo Doubs out there. Michigan State, 636 yards, 5 touchdowns in 11 games last year, 10 touchdowns on 1,026 yards, 59 catches in 13 games in 2021. Productive enough numbers. Second round pick, obviously there's a lot of draft capital tied up in him. So that's the kind of guy we're looking for. 3,000 on the DK slate. That buys you a little bit of upside. Samori Toure might get on the field. Would have to move up based on some of these guys being out. But potential for him, potential for Malik Heath to move up. Heath, undrafted, made the team in the preseason, had a solid preseason. If all 3 of Watson, Doubs, and Wicks are out, so 2 guys to go, maybe he even moves up the depth chart a little bit, sees a look or 2. Toure would be the more likely option. Former 7th-round pick, saw 16% of the plays last year in the games that he made it on the field for. 5 of 10 for 82 yards, 1 touchdown in 11 games. Coach speak around him this week, knowing that they were going to be a little short-handed, saying that they trust him, saying if they have to put him out there, they're happy to put him out there. Very, very cheap. Obi-Wan asks, are we going team-by-team breakdown format? We're going like game-by-game, and then I'm kind of hopping around. I'm trying to keep it as team-by-team as I can, but going between the board where it's grouped specifically team-by-team and then the way that I did the notes, I'm getting a little bit jumbled up. So I'm kind of going like pass game, run game, back and forth. Who said that? Michael Knack. I'm going to give credit where credit's due. Michael Knack says he watched Musgrave all training camp. Going to be a stud. That's an interesting shout out. Tight end coming out of Oregon State last year. Just 2 games, 304 yards, 1 touchdown in 13 games in 2021. Last year, just 2 games, 304 yards and a touchdown in 13 games in 2021. He's 6'6", 253 pounds. Second round pick, 42nd overall. So again, a lot of draft capital tied up in that player. Good route runner. True tight end number 1 in their offense. Was tied to Love in the preseason. Seems like they're trying to build up a little bit of connection there. So yeah, I didn't see too much of him. I didn't watch all that much preseason. But I agree. I think that's an interesting option just given that he's going to be that guy in that offense and given how cheap he is. And just not a name that's really out there yet. Especially with limited receiving options. Especially if Doubs is out. Could easily move up to like their second primary receiver as the tight end if in that situation if we're missing a couple of these guys. So keep an eye on that depth chart. Keep an eye on the injury news. We'll try and clean it up in the morning when we get a little bit more information. If we do a show tomorrow morning, we'll certainly be talking about it again when we get it cleaned up. But going to be some interesting plays there. Some very, very cheap options that will probably get a little bit of volume in that situation. What else did we miss in this one? Talked about the tight ends on the other side. Talked about some of the runners, their pass catchers on the Bears, pass catchers on the Packers. Talked about all these guys. Tyler Scott we talked about. Yeah, I think that's this one up and down. Let me pull that back up. Johnson. Oh, come on. do we spell his name? Rosch. That's what I missed. There he is. Yeah, on the ground last year, somebody mentioned Johnson good out of the backfield. So just to clean up what I was saying there, on the ground last year, 93 carries, 554 yards, and 5 TDs at Texas in 2022. Had 1 touchdown, 128 yards on 14 catches last year. Reasonably productive. 569 yards, 5 TDs the year before that. His freshman year, 2019, he had 649 yards, 7 touchdowns. A reasonably productive player. 6'2", 223. Big dude. If Wicks does play, he's a playable guy. But I don't know. I don't know that we get him. And like I said, given the fact that he's been limited, even if he's out there, it might just be for a couple looks. Might be limited while getting a little action just because they need a body. Let's move on from this one, though. Playable stacks on both sides. More interesting skill players than there is like Vegas-based upside. But interesting skill players for sure. A very interesting high-end quarterback in terms of his ability to get in the end zone multiple times, whether he throws it there or whether he runs it in himself. I do think Justin Fields is on the board for a big score, or potentially for a big score. Houston and Baltimore. Baltimore, the 11th offensive DVOA projection, 19th by defensive. Houston, 31st offensive, 24th defensive. Probably being a little bit generous with the defensive one being even 24th. No, the team is just not really trying this year. CJ Stroud taking over, second overall pick. The quarterback position for Houston. Obviously, we've got Lamar going over for Baltimore. Top end quarterback, 8,000 to 8,900 across sites. Nothing to dislike about Lamar outside of maybe the price and probably the popularity in a matchup against Houston. For some reason, my notes say Lamarck Jackson, M-A-R-K. Probably because I was brain dead at 5 o'clock in the morning when I was typing it. And I just hit a accidental K there. Projects out really well for us. He's a little bit behind the industry consensus. Minor issue there, like a point or two behind, but a little bit behind the industry consensus. I love the player. I really like the total, 44-point total. They're 10-point favorites, though. This one might get away. We might see limited passing volume. We might not have Mark Andrews, his primary favorite target. He's going to be working with some new receivers in Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham. I do like the upside for Isaiah Likely, who he liked working with last year when Mark Andrews was out. So there's a little bit of potential even if we don't get Andrews. But just given the fact that we kind of expect Baltimore to run off and hide, I don't know how much I want to put into this game. They could easily go out there, score their 24 points, and just say thank you very much and run out the clock and just kind of grind the rest of this one away, where Lamar's not really flinging the ball around. He's not really having to rush that much. So it might take a little bit of the gleam off, but there's obviously really good projections here, and there's some pretty good skill players. If Andrews goes, I really like that combination. I like him as an individual tight end. I think he's perfectly viable on his own. 6,200, 8,000 across sites. Better option on the DK slate relative money-wise, but a playable part on FanDuel for sure. Took 7.5 targets a game last year, 5 touchdowns, 9.7 yard ADOT, 7.5 yards per target, 847 total yards. He's Mark Andrews. There's nothing really to not breaking any new ground when talking about him. He's got a quad issue that's kept him limited in practices, currently questionable. I feel like he's going to play. I drafted him in season longs as if he was going to play week 1. I still think he's going to get out there. But if he doesn't, like I said, I do think Isaiah Likely at least a little bit interesting. 373 yards on 36 catches, 60 targets with 3 touchdowns last year, 8.3 targets a game in the 3 games with Andrews out. That's not nothing for a $3,000, $4,700 tight end for a quarterback that confirmed likes throwing to that position. Might be scrambling around and need a safety valve. Not off the board for the price. Looking at some of the receiving options for Lamar, I just kind of jumped in on the Baltimore side because it's just the better option. Odell, potentially in a red zone guy. I really don't know what to make of Odell at this point. 5,000, 5,700. Obviously nothing there. In terms of last year, we've seen him excel Ankle injury early in the week, supposedly minor, supposedly playing, supposedly full speed ahead. He's cheap enough. He could certainly catch the ball. I know that about Odell Beckham. Those hands are still ridiculous. He is not Kadarius Toney out there. Some pretty funny tweets going around about Kadarius Toney those since Thursday. Went to the IL with broken hands. The one with Chubb from Happy Gilmore with his hand. Pretty funny stuff. Rashad Bateman dealing with a Lisfranc injury, which is a foot injury. Says he's still hurting. Was just talking the other day about how his foot still hurts. Questionable. Might not go. Devin Duvernay would probably step in that case. Moderate upside there. Low end projection, because he's not really projected to get much volume right now. 3.5 targets a game. Gave us 3 TDs, 407 yards, 8.31 yards per target. I feel like I've been expecting Devin Duvernay to break out and give me good fantasy games over and over again for a number of different years as like a cheap dart throw type of a guy in this kind of a situation. And he just doesn't really deliver. So I don't know how much I end up going to him, even if it's not that situation. Zay Flowers probably going to be the primary, especially if Mark Andrews is out. 4,000, 5,500, not priced like it. Definitely a value option. Out of BC, 12 games last year, 78 targets, 1,077 yards, 12 touchdowns. As a junior the year before, 746 yards, 5 TDs on 44 catches, 10 touchdowns as a sophomore, 892 yards. First round pick, 22nd overall, lots of draft capital. Only fully healthy wide receiver all through camp. I definitely think there's going to be a connection established here. I definitely think there's all the reason in the world to expect him to be the primary receiver, given that they spent that pick on him, given that he's the only truly healthy guy out of these options. On the running game, for Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins, 8 games, had more knee issues last year. Didn't play in the preseason. He was holding out. Then they were being cautious about the knee, the comeback from injury. It's a very good matchup for running. Not my favorite back to go to. 12.4 touches a game last year. 2 rushing touchdowns. 65 yards rushing. 5.7 yards per rush attempt. It's a good rush. It's a good average. 1 touchdown through the air. 5.25 yards per target. I don't know. I feel like it's a situation where I want to see it, and I'm just much more interested in what Lamar's going to do with his legs and who he's going to throw the ball to. That's the part of this offense that I want to be involved with. I don't really think I want to go to the Dobbins part of it. The one compelling thing about the Dobbins play is potentially if they get the lead and they just start feeding him the ball to grind down the clock. You've also got Gus Edwards there. 6 touchdowns on 144 carries, 723 yards in 2021. Only played 9 games, 87 attempts last year, 3 touchdowns. 9 of 13 receiving for 129 yards in 2021. A pretty limited option. Was expected to be a little bit better than he's delivered so far. As the second man on the depth chart, I don't really see much need to go to him. Projects out okay for that role, but not really a true two-headed situation. More a 1 and a 2. Justice Hill also still there, but just kind of lingering on the depth chart. Dual threat talent, but never really the volume to deliver it, and never really, he's been here for a while. No real upside there. Went through the receiving core, went through that. So CJ Stroud, did I read off his stats? I forget. 2nd overall pick, limited offensive line, limited weapons around him. Going up against the Baltimore team, only moderately projected in terms of where their defense is supposed to be. 19th. By projected defensive DVOA ranking. But they've been a respectable enough defense for years. They've got a 10-point edge in Vegas. I don't really see CJ Stroud doing a ton of damage here, given the situation, given the weapons he's got to work with. 3,688 yards and 41 touchdowns in 13 games at Ohio State last year. 4,400 with 44 touchdowns the year before. Obviously, there's talent here. There's a reason he was the 2nd overall pick. But I don't know what the situation is going to look like. Dameon Pierce is his primary running back. Devin Singletary also here. Singletary more of a blocking back, an okay receiving back, a third down option. 2nd on the depth chart overall. He did have 7 touchdowns in 2021, 5 last year on the ground, 1 receiving each of those years. It was a multi-headed situation there. It's kind of a multi-headed situation here. Dameon Pierce, limited by the line, limited by his talent. Not my favorite option. 4 touchdowns last year. 58-62. Saw 3 targets. Saw 19.2 touches a game. Only got in the end zone 4 times. 72 and 2/3. 70. I'm still in baseball mode. 72.2 rush yards per game. I don't know. Not my guy here in terms of the lower cost running backs. If he gets any kind of popularity, I just don't want any part of the play. He'd be in the pool for a couple of shares. He projects out okay enough, but not really a high-end option. Where are we at the rest of the way? Nico Collins off the top. Primary receiver. That's the situation here. Nico Collins is your number one. Robert Woods coming into this offense. Noah Brown. It's like a lot of guys that we didn't want to play when they were on better teams now on this team to work with here, and Nico Collins. I don't really love any of these options. If you're looking at Noah Brown, 4.6 targets a game, gave us 3 touchdowns, did have a 10.8 yard ADOT, 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Robert Woods, 7.8 yard ADOT, only 2 touchdowns. Nico only got in twice last year, did have an 11.3 yard ADOT, 7.29 yards per target, 481 yards. Obviously, that was playing with Davis Mills rather than CJ Stroud. There's more talent at the quarterback position now, but there's going to be a little bit of growing pains. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve here, I think, and just not the greatest options in the world to work with. Brown, 555 yards and 3 touchdowns in Dallas last year. Only had those 3 touchdowns in 6 seasons. He's 27 years old now. Been around for a minute. Robert Woods, only 2 touchdowns last year, 53 of 91. He's 31 years old. Probably heading down the back end of the career, heading down the hill. You want to catch these guys on the upswing in football, not on the back end of the career. Dalton Schultz, super touchdown dependent. Brevin Jordan and Tegan Quatoriano. Anybody with their name, first 4 letters of their last name is Quit, probably not the greatest option for football. Quatoriano saw 2 targets a game last year. Any of the options for the tight end position on Houston, it's just basically trying to book that touchdown. Dalton Schultz is your primary option. He got in 5 times last year, 7.2 yard ADOT, 577 yards. A decent receiving tight end, no doubt about it. 4,600, 5,200. He's fairly priced. That's a reasonable enough option, but not a super high-end play. Not in this offense. Not one of my premium targets. So this one is significant interest in the Baltimore side of the equation, but a little bit hesitant because of the big point spread. If they get out and hide, they can definitely run the ball and just grind this down, and it would limit the upside for some of these guys. But Lamar's got a huge upside all of his own, and especially if Mark Andrews is in there, that pairing has a big upside. Zay Flowers has talent. Odell can catch the ball. Bateman's got a little bit of talent. There's some options here. I prefer the passing game greatly to the running game. Most of my weight's going to be on the Baltimore side, but that means I will have some of these skill players, the Nikos of the world, the Robert Woodses, as uncomfortable as that is, of the world. They're going to be options in my stacks as run backs. Oh, I missed Tank Dell. 3,000, 4,900. Wouldn't want to leave a single player out of the breakdown. My God. That would have been tragic, especially an interesting guy like Tank Dell. Hamstring and back issues in the preseason. At Houston, 13 games in 2022. Houston, the college. 1,398 yards, 17 touchdowns on 109 catches last year in 13 games. In 2021, 1,300 plus yards, 12 touchdowns. Talent. You can get behind that for the cheap prices. I definitely think he's on the board just as much as like an old Robert Woods. Not as much as Nico, but as like a number 3, probably ahead of Noah Brown. It's a good play. I like that. Should definitely see some volume. What else did we miss? I like Isaiah Likely if Mark Andrews doesn't play. I think that's it for this one. We're rolling through this. Hopefully the info's good. Hopefully you guys aren't bored out there. 44 people hanging out with us. I knew this one's going to go long. We're an hour and 44 into it. We were like halfway. Hang in there, gang. It's going to be a late one. Trey says Baltimore averaged 37 points per game in season openers with Lamar and have hit the over their team total in 75% of their games. could run the score up. That's interesting info. It's not always predictive by any means. It's not like they're not trying to do that every time out. So yes, they know it's their season debut, but the numbers don't necessarily work that way. But that's at least very interesting stuff. The fact that they've gone out there and just kind of hit the ground running. Lamar's always been a little bit more effective early in the season, so that's interesting. I can get behind that. Maybe it supports the idea of that stack having upside even beyond whether they score points or not. Maybe they keep the throttle down, want to run the score up a little bit, just embarrass Houston for whatever reason. I can see it. Or there is also the situation where like Lamar's just trying to run the clock out. He breaks right, gets around the edge, and now it's open sailing. It's not like he's just going to go down. So you've always got that opportunity. Just I didn't even want to score, but I scored. Kind of in those blowout games. Obi says, keep it coming. No choice, pal. Got to. We're making okay time. As far as my expectations for how this was going to go, we're doing all right. Indy and Jacksonville, 46.5 point total. This is an interesting one. 4.5 point spread. Indy underdogs at home. Jacksonville the better of these two teams. An interesting game, though. Skill players on the Indy side. I like both receivers in both primaries in Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce. I think Anthony Richardson's going to be a talented kid. I don't know if it's immediate. I don't know if it's today. It might be more of a bit of a learning curve like we saw from Trevor Lawrence on the other side of this one. He had a nice emergence late in the season last year, but had been up and down going into that. So it could be that kind of a situation. Overall, Jacksonville, 8th ranked offensive DVOA, but 26th ranked projected defensive DVOA. Oh, that one's not showing. It's probably Jax, not JAC on the other side. Apologies that one's not showing on the board. I just noticed that. Indy, 29th ranked offensive DVOA, 21st ranked defensive DVOA projection. So again, those are projected numbers for how these defenses are supposed to be, which I think when we're looking at this is kind of more informative than telling you exactly what they did last year, given that it could be completely different personnel sets. Starting with the Jacksonville side of things, Trevor Lawrence, very interesting option given the high total here. 4,100 yards and 25 touchdowns last year and gets Calvin Ridley to work with now. Low-end Colts defense only cost $6,500 on the DraftKings slate. That feels a little bit cheap for a guy with that much talent. $8,000 on FanDuel, you're paying basically full freight, but he projects out pretty well. He's got some very good weapons to work with. Travis Etienne coming out of the backfield. Calvin Ridley. Christian Kirk is a good enough receiver. Evan Engram. Even Zay Jones. There's some interesting players there. This could be a dynamic offense. Lawrence, 7.4 intended air yards. 7 yards per passing attempt per attempt, 25 TDs last year. Calvin Ridley coming in after his last relevant action was October 2 years ago. Didn't play since then. Went out with, I think it was personal issues back then. Then had a gambling suspension for all of last year. So it's basically a season and a half lost. Last time he was healthy, 90 catches on 143 looks with 9 touchdowns in 2020, 1,374 yards. 7 touchdowns in 2019, 10 touchdowns in 2018. Still only 28, 6'1", 190, good route runner. Rave reviews in camp. Supposedly developing a good connection. Going to be the premium receiver in this offense. I think it feels like a get him while he's cheap kind of a situation. 7,000 for this opportunity against this defense feels like a little bit cheap. I think there's upside there for sure. So I like Calvin Ridley. I like Calvin on his own. I like Calvin in pairings with Trevor Lawrence even better. Christian Kirk, good wide receiver 2 behind Ridley, 5,600, 6,900. Not bad pricing. 7.8 targets a game last year. Give us 8 sneaky touchdowns, 1,108 yards, 8.33 yards per target on a 9.1 yard ADOT. That's an effective weapon that people are just going to not go to. They're going to go to Calvin Ridley more. They're going to go to Evan Engram more. And Christian Kirk's going to slip through the cracks for 5,600, 6,900. He projects out well. He's got upside. He's going to have looks. He's got talent. I like that a lot. I think that's an interesting option when you're not going to Calvin. I think that's an interesting option to save money. I think it's an interesting option to pair with Calvin in double stacks, pair with Evan Engram in double stacks. A lot of ways to go with this offense. Etienne. I thought Etienne had a good year last year. Came in with some draft capital. It was a fairly talented player. Overall, the stats aren't here. I got to scroll over. That's why it's another one we got to... What's fun is when these boards get replaced every week. That's why the naming table comes in handy. Got to remember who these guys are. There he is. So he gave us 5 TDs last year. 66.2 rush yards per game. 5.1 yards per rush attempt. Not bad for 6,900, 7,900, 7,700. Also got to take him off for receiving. Receiving wise, 316 yards, no touchdowns. 10.1 yards after the catch, though, 7.02 yards per target. Only 2.6 targets a game. Not the biggest primary option in terms of receiving. But the point behind me saying I thought he was good, I thought he had a pretty decent year last year, they went out and used a 3rd-round pick on Tank Bigsby. Looked good in the preseason. Could definitely poach some touchdowns. It's kind of problematic for the upside for Travis Etienne, I think. 12 games, 970 yards on 179 carries, 10 touchdowns last year, 1,099 on 223 carries, and 10 touchdowns the year before, both at Auburn. That's a talented enough kid. They put some draft capital into him. At best, it's going to be like a dual-headed situation where Etienne's the primary, but he's going to get some carries. He's going to start poaching some carry shares. He's going to start getting some red zone looks, punch the ball into the end zone, steal the touchdowns from Etienne. I can see this one going pear-shaped really quickly for Etienne. So I don't like him as much as his talent might say. 6,900 more playable on DK than FanDuel, I think. 5,000 across both sites for Tank Bigsby. Not uninteresting. If you're going to the Jacksonville rushing game, I do think there's a little bit of potential there, especially if you get him poaching the touchdown week 1. A touchdown pays for him at 5,000. A touchdown on its own doesn't necessarily pay for 6,900, 7,700 Travis Etienne. Very different plays. Bigsby is a danger to the ceiling of Travis Etienne. What else we got here? JaMychal Hasty signed an extension. So another mouth to feed on the ground there, but not a priority by any means. A little bit of receiving action, 1 touchdown, 126 yards, 1.9 targets a game, 3.9 touches a game last year on the ground, 11.4 rush yards per game, 2 touchdowns. Very low priority option, not playable, I don't think, for DFS purposes. On the Indy side, all right, let me talk through the... what do we got left for Jacksonville? We talked about Ridley. We talked about Kirk. Evan Ingram. I knew there was somebody lurking out there. 29 years old now. That went fast. I still have my Giants shirt with Evan Ingram on the back of it. His number, all that. When they drafted him, I was like, cool. We can get these shirts. My mom, for Thanksgiving every year back in the day, would get us all Giants shirts for whatever player we or / she picked that year. So it got to the point where just like every single season, whoever we got was gone. He either sucked or he was cut or he was traded or, became a free agent, whatever the case was. So like I started going to the high-end rookies and I was like, all right, Evan Ingram, he's going to be here for a while. Gone. Never was good as a Giant. Gone. Breakout year last year. Saquon Barkley, got him one of those years. Probably gone next year. Awesome player. Is what it is. I do think Ridley steals some targets from Evan Ingram this season, but he's a pretty decent volume receiver at the tight end position. 5.8 targets a game last year, 4 touchdowns, 766 yards total, 6.3 yard average depth of target, 7.82 yards per target. So a pretty productive option at the tight end position for 4,700, 5,800. At least the price is right, if nothing else. I think that rounds out the Jacksonville side. Zay Jones got into some 2 wides with Ridley in the preseason. Another situation, just a lot of mouths to feed there. Did have 5 touchdowns last year. 7 touchdowns in 2018 with Buffalo was his career high. Target and receiving career highs, 82 for 121 and 823 yards were his career highs. as the third option on the depth chart, but potentially stepping in at least sometimes as the second option, replacing Christian Kirk. There's maybe a little bit of third man upside there, dart throw type upside for 45, 56, but it's limited. There's limited appeal on that one. Projects a few points behind Kirk, who projects a few points behind Ridley, who has Engram in the middle. So I don't love the Zay Jones option. Anthony Richardson for Indy, starting out of the gate. Dual threat quarterback, 4.43 40 time. Pretty fast for a quarterback. Fourth overall pick. Played 4 games as a freshman in 2020, 8 games as a freshman in second freshman year in 2021, 12 games in 2022, 2,549 pass yards, 17 TDs, 9 interceptions, 654 yards on 103 carries with 9 rushing TDs. Pretty interesting. I forget his name, but the new coach for the Colts was there developing Jalen Hurts over the last couple of years with the Eagles. The idea behind that potentially being that it would follow a pretty similar development curve for, it's probably an unfair comp to make for the kid, despite his supreme talent and obvious talent that he demonstrated in college. But there's a somewhat comparable path there where they went pretty run heavy, fairly conservative on the passing the first couple seasons, and then kind of built him up, and then unleashed him. You could see Richardson potentially following a similar path, but he does have undeniable talent. He's got a couple weapons to work with in Michael Pittman, in Alec Pierce. I think he's playable, if nothing else. 56, 67. I'm willing to find out. He projects out fairly well in the model. Going up against a defense that's projected to be, 26th ranked defensive DVOA. I think you could take some shots there with Anthony Richardson. He's got the weapons to work with. Deion Jackson and Zach Moss in kind of a dual 1-1A situation. Moss is coming back from a broken arm. Jackson's probably the lead overall, but he's kind of a limited guy. 5.6 touches a game last year, 14 yards, rush yards per game, got in the end zone once. 1 touchdown through the air, 6.15 yards per target on 2.8 targets a game in limited action that year. I greatly prefer the passing situation here. Just give me my shares of the Michael Pittmans of the world, Alec Pierces of the world. Pittman, the clear guy, was playing with Matt Ryan, only 4 touchdowns, 925 yards. Caught 99 balls on 141 targets. Led the team in targets, led the team in receptions. Supremely talented option. 6.9 yard average ADOT, 925 yards total, 6.56 yards per target. Alec Pierce, interesting value option, considering that he only cost $3,800, $5,200 at the wide receiver spot. The clear number 2 on the team. Good deep threat. 11.7 yard ADOT last year, 593 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7.6 yards per target. Definitely some upside. For a kid who can throw the ball, definitely some upside for a couple deep looks there. Isaiah McKenzie, there's only 4 wide receivers apparently on this depth chart, so each one of these guys is going to get a little bit of love. Isaiah McKenzie at 3,200, 5,000. Couple of looks maybe. Last year, 4.1 targets a game, 4 touchdowns, 423 yards, 6.5 per target. I think Josh Downs probably a little bit more interesting. 3rd round pick, 79th overall. Draft capital's probably going to put him on the board for at least a few looks. Went to North Carolina, 1,029 yards and 11 touchdowns on 94 catches in 11 games last year. 1,336 yards, 8 touchdowns on 101 catches in 13 games in 2021. North Carolina, so you're not talking about the primary football factory of America by any means. But those are productive numbers. Knee issues early in camp, played the last few weeks, apparently has a connection with Richardson going. I think that's an interesting option, certainly more so than Isaiah McKenzie. We've seen Isaiah McKenzie, we know who he is. So I like Pittman, Pierce, Downs, then McKenzie. As far as the guys that not the entire world is going to be playing, Pierce and Josh Downs definitely gain a little bit of ground there. I think they're both playable as run back plays in stacks of Jaguars on the other side. Something like a Lawrence Ridley, Josh Downs. It's kind of interesting. What else we got here? Tight ends position, Kylan Granson. It's going to be Granson and Mo Alley Cox as the primaries. He had 302 yards on 7.55 yards per target. 0 touchdowns. pretty low end in terms of the Indy tight ends. Pretty touchdown dependent. Whether or not you get the touchdown out of one of these guys, they're very, very cheap. That's really all they are, is cheap building blocks with touchdown requirements for upside. So I don't love the tight end options from Indy. It's more focused on the wide receivers. Don't love the ground game from Indy either. So it's just really Richardson and his wide receivers on the Indy side. And then you can spread out a little bit more. Trevor Lawrence, any of his wide receivers. Evan Engram is definitely interesting. And ATN / Tank Bigsby, a little bit interesting. Let's hit this one up. Let's move it along. Rams at Seattle. Another big total. Game I like quite a bit. Seattle favored by 5.5 at home. This one could shoot out. I think there's a little bit of potential for this one to shoot out. The obvious, major talking point, the thing that's getting all the buzz, is no Cooper Kupp for the Rams. They put him on IR today, so he's going to be out for a minute. Van Jefferson takes over the lead role in the receiving attack for Matt Stafford. The guy I actually like in this offense, the guy that I was drafting late in season-long drafts, that guy right there. Puka Nacua. Welcome to Puka time. $3,000 on DK, $4,000 on the FanDuel slate. Solid little projection. I like that option. Good fit for the offense. 5th round draft pick out of BYU. Not crazy draft capital, but not nothing. 5th round pick. 6'2", 201 pounds. Efficient receiver in college. 805 yards and 6 touchdowns on 43 catches in 12 games in 2021. Also carried the ball 14 times for 148 yards. 2022, 5 touchdowns on 48 catches in 9 games, 625 yards, 25 carries for 209 yards, and ran the ball in 5 times. Interesting dual threat. A lot of coach speak around him. Coach speak around him getting the ball on the ground a little bit. Definitely interesting. Climbing the depth chart, was already getting talk is probably going to slide in as the number 3. And that was if Cooper Kupp went. He's going to get some looks. He is interesting. This is one of my premium. I don't know how under the radar he is anymore. He's probably getting a little bit of industry buzz, but especially at the deep discounts on both sites, one of my favored low cost, high ceiling options on the board. Matt Stafford throwing to him. Only 9 games last year, limited in the games he did play. We've got, out of Mr. Stafford last year, we got 10 touchdowns in those 9 games. That's not a great total. We'd like to have a couple more multi-touchdown games there. 6.7 intended air yards per pass attempt. Not exactly throwing the ball deep all that often. 6.9 yards per pass attempt. It's Cooper Kupp or nothing a lot of the time in that offense. But now he's got a little bit to work with maybe. If you do go to Van Jefferson, it's a primary downfield target when Kupp was out last year, but he was kind of limited even in those situations. Typically, all we need is volume for football, but with receivers, you do also have the added factor of catching the ball, getting open, being in the right situation. He turned 4.4 targets a game last year and only 3 touchdowns, 369 yards and 8.39 yard per target. Only 1.6 yards after the catch, but did have a pretty solid ADOT at 15.8 yards per target. So he's just downfield. Interesting downfield option. Puka maybe working a little bit more out of the backfield, a little bit more in short range, but can get out down the field as well. Tutu Atwell was popular, getting a little bit of chatter in our Discord earlier this week. Cause of contention, getting a little bit of chatter around town. Going to be the primary slot option. Limited output last year. 3,000, 5,000. He's certainly value priced, but my preference is Nacua in that spot. Atwell 1 touchdown last year. Did have a 17.8 yard ADOT. That's certainly intriguing as far as another guy that you can just take deep shots with. Only 1 touchdown, 298 yards though. Not a primary focus for me. My hope is that Tutu Atwell continues to pull discussion away from Puka Nacua. I also just kind of want to have some beers and party with these guys because it would just be fun to say their names like 400 times in a night. I like both those names. Seems like a fun group. Ben Skoranek. Another interesting name. That's fun to say, as Buddy the Elf would say. Minor possibility of an uptick for Skoranek. He's been around for a bit of a minute. 4.4 targets a game last year. 0 touchdowns, 376 yards. Not all that great. 7.9 yard ADOT. Not really a deep threat. 6.16 yards per target. Effective, going to be on the field, going to see 2 or 3 looks, might catch 2 or 3 of them. Touchdown dependent, very low end option. I prefer all the other receivers that I talked about. Demarcus Robinson is also apparently on that team. 3,200. Another one, 4.7 targets a game last year. 2 receiving touchdowns, 458 yards. We kind of know who Demarcus Robinson is at this point. When he gets looks, he might turn him into something. But overall, not that great. 9-yard A-dot last year. 3,000 is very, very cheap for a guy who, could get a downfield look, could break away. But he's behind all those other receiving options on that depth chart. Tyler Higbee, an interesting tight end. Tons of looks late in the season last year. He's the number 1 or the number 2 target for this offense. It's like Van Jefferson and or Puka and then Tyler Higbee. Probably in truth, it's Van Jefferson, then Tyler Higbee, or potentially even Tyler Higbee, then Van Jefferson. He's going to be involved. Last year, 6.8 targets a game, turned it into 3 TDs, 620 yards, 5.6 yards after the catch, and effective enough receiving option at the tight end. Knows a little bit about working with Stafford at this point, a little bit of chemistry between them. I don't mind going to Higbee when I'm going to stacks with the Rams. Even in a 2-man, if it's like Nakua and Higbee in there with Stafford, you're very, very cheap on both sites. If you're building that stack, it's a good way to get started. Your DK total for 3-man there is 13.5 with a $4,500 player average. That is including a quarterback. Not bad. And you can do that with multiple guys in terms of if you like Tutu Atwell better than Puka, you can do the same thing. You could do a Stafford, Puka, and Tutu. Now you're getting really creative. That one gives you a $3,900 average, 11.7 total spend. Like I've said, I prefer going single stack, so like a Stafford, Puka, and then bring me back either one of these guys on the other side. Helps me average down my DK Metcalf cost, my Tyler Lockett cost, if nothing else. Going to a Puka, going to a Tutu. Obviously, that Seattle passing game is going to be a primary focus here. 2 premium receivers. Another good receiver, or potentially a good receiver if he's on the field. An interesting tight end. Noah Fant, by the way. This is the guy name I was trying to conjure when I was talking the other day about the tight end from Seattle that won me that big showdown slate last year. It was Noah Fant. That's my guy. I got to get one of these days. I got to get a Noah Fant jersey for that big win. And then I got to get a Joe Ross. Remember Joe Ross, the pitcher? One of my first big baseball win, the one that I've talked about, where I was at the Yankees-Red Sox game with the Yankees stack. They blew out the Red Sox, and I won my first real big payday in a baseball slate. Joe Ross was my pitcher that day. It was like 1% owned, like $5,000 pitcher on FanDuel. And I said I was going to, got to get a Joe Ross jersey because who's got a Joe Ross jersey? Never got around to doing it, but I will. He was on the Nationals then. So Noah Fant and Joe Ross, 2 of my guys. Fant, tight end by committee with Disley and Parkinson. None of them really that appealing, but Fant is overall the best out of those tight ends for Seattle. Not sure why I chose to start on the tight end position for Seattle outside of talking about Fant, but he did get in the end zone 4 times last year, 486 yards, 7.71 yards per target. Technically, Disley had a better yards per target, but fewer targets overall, 2.5 targets per game. I prefer Fant as the option in the Seattle tight end passing situation here. Obviously, we skipped over Geno as their quarterback, kind of an important starting point. Surprise breakout last year going up against the 32nd ranked Rams secondary, a team that ranks 30th by defensive DVOA projected. Seattle 25th ranked offense DVOA projected. I feel like they're going to beat that. I like these receivers too much. They do have a 7th ranked defensive DVOA projected, so those good Rams players that I was talking about do have that going against them. And that's on the board over here. 7th ranked defense. This is the opponent, so Matthew Stafford going up against the defense. 25th ranked offense. You guys get how that works. I don't know why I feel the need to explain these things. You guys are way too sharp to need me to explain that to you. Geno, 2 major targets in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett gets no respect. I consider this still a 1-1A situation. Lockett's getting a little bit older, but still saw 7.3 targets a game last year. Still scored 9 times. 1,033 yards, 8.83 yards per target, a 10.6 yard ADOT. Both of those guys run deep routes. 11.2 yard ADOT for DK Metcalf as their primary receiver. He's going to be the more popular of the two, most likely. He's led the team in target share last year. Major weapon in the red zone. Tons of end zone targets. Obviously, a premium target. 1,048 yards, 6 touchdowns, 2.4 yards after the catch. A little bit better after the catch for TJ Lockett. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba. Hurt his wrist in the preseason. Questionable for tomorrow. May or may not make it back. 3 games in 2022 at Ohio State last year. 5 catches for 43 yards, but 1,606 yards with 9 touchdowns. 16.9 yards per catch in 13 games as a sophomore the year before. 6 foot, 197 pounds. Kid that they expect to produce and probably one day take over that job. Right now, kind of the third man in, but if he's out there, I think he's another viable weapon for this team. Kid that they're gonna be focused on throwing the ball to. If he plays and you want to skip one of these guys in a combination of both, or use them in a couple shares as a primary, I think you're saving a lot of money at $49.53, and it's a viable option. I don't know how many shares of a limited option there that I want, along with like the tight end. But on a team with limited receiving options overall, it's like very high end, but not a lot of depth on this team in terms of the receivers. So he's on the board if he plays. Kenneth Walker, another player who had a really good year last year, and then they went out and drafted a kid behind him. Similar situation to what Travis Etienne had. Last year, good on second half volume. Missed time with a groin injury in camp, which doesn't help his cause any. Saw 17 touches a game last year. 70 yards a game, 9 touchdowns on the ground. That's a pretty decent rushing season. Added 165 yards through the air, 4.7 yards per target on 2.3 targets a game. He only cost $6,700, but he's going to be pushed by Zach Charbonnet. Charbonnet? Not sure. Good receiving back in college, second round pick, so another guy, lot of draft capital. But they're technically, this one I think is very much just playing some games. Monkey shines, as they say. Technically, they're saying that DJ Dallas is ahead of this kid on the depth chart. I don't buy it. It's like Rashee Rice the other day. I just don't buy it. I think they're just playing possum with their opponent. Charbonnet he's the clear-cut second back on this team. Out of UCLA last year, so they spent a second-round pick on him. 1,359 yards on 195 carries, 321 yards on 37 catches, 14 touchdowns, all rushing in 10 games. No receiving touchdowns despite a ton of targets. A lot of yards in his 2 featured years in college. 4,800 on both sites. Lot of talent for cheap. I think it's a situation where if Walker's not performing, the kid gets out there, sees a few more, picks up a few more touches later in the game. As the game's going on, if they're just grinding Walker into dust, he's not really doing anything. I think that feeds to opportunity in his direction. And then if DJ Dallas is the true number 2, as they're claiming, he would obviously have a little bit of upside in that situation. But I'm much more interested in this option. You've also got the injury concern. Ken Walker, goes out there, pops his groin again. All of a sudden, it's Zach Charbonnet's day. Michael Knack thinks Ken Walker's going to be a bust. Oh, Mama's got a tight end cousin on the Rams. Rams practice squad. Sweet. Oh, too bad he wasn't on. Too bad he didn't get on a Hard Knocks team. That'd be fun. Watch your cousin go into the room and find out whether he made the team in those big scenes late in the season. So let's keep it rolling here. Where are we at? We talked about the Rams side. We talked about the rushing game. We talked about the passing game on the Seattle side. We didn't really talk about the rushing game on the Rams side, did we? Cam Akers. Major usage late in the season last year. 85 yards a game on the ground the last 6 weeks of the season. Has Kyron Williams here now to get in the way. Seattle's weak against receiving backs. Supposed to be the lead receiving back in this offense. 4,100, 5,000. I greatly prefer the Cam Akers side if I'm going to a running back from this game. He finished with 0 touchdowns. Oh, that's receiving, sorry. 7 touchdowns on the ground. It didn't sound right. 7 touchdowns on the ground last year. Rush yards per game overall, only 52.4. But like I said, down the stretch, 85 yards a game in the last 6 weeks of the season was pretty significant. So a major uptick there. I prefer this team through the air, though. I kind of want to make my stand if I'm going to this team with the Matthew Stafford, Jefferson, Nakua, Higbee portion of this offense. Talked about the rushing game over here. We've talked about the tight ends. I don't think DJ Dallas makes the board, despite their claims that he's the number 2. It's been low-end production from him anyway. I'm just not really seeing it. 1.3 targets a game last year, turned it into 126 yards, zero TDs on the ground last year, 12.4 yards per game. Come on, who are they trying to fool? Not us, that's for sure. Noah Fant, Tyler Higbee, Marcus Robinson, going down on those bullet points. I think we got everybody. Not that anybody's going to call us on it if we didn't. If I skip your favorite player, just let me know in the chat. We can swing back. I've probably got notes on them. Vegas and Denver. Interesting looking spot. Could definitely see some offense firing off here. 3.5 point game. Denver favored at home. Got the situation first week in Mile High. Always tends to be a little bit wonky for the visiting team. Not that that's something that you can quantify necessarily. Not that it's something that I have involved in where these guys project. Just something to throw into the mix, but something to think about. The Denver D projects out fairly well. A lot of value there. They're only 4,000 on the FanDuel slate. That said, 23rd projected defensive DVOA for the year. So I don't know how much faith I have in that. But they're going up against Vegas. They're going up against a version of this Vegas offense with Jimmy G throwing the ball now instead of Derek Carr. So a downgraded offense. They're expected to be 9th? Is that right? 9th? That seems high. All right, 9th projected, 9th ranked offensive DVOA projection for the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't really buy that. But, all right, maybe their offense is a little bit better than I was giving it credit for. They do have weapons, obviously, in Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams. Those are two premium players. But they're not going to do it all themselves, certainly not without a good quarterback. Jimmy G, effective enough, more of a game manager type rather than a big arm. But working with Devontae Adams can turn anybody into at least a reasonably good-looking quarterback. Sean Payton now, obviously, in Denver. Key situation, going to, supposedly anyway, go in there and rescue Russ and kind of change things around, save the day after that disaster last year. Just from week 1 on, it was immediately apparent that coaching situation was a total mess. I forget what the specifics of it were. I remember watching that first game. It was Hackett was the guy's name, right? Whatever that stupid decision he made week 1 was, going for it late or not calling a timeout, whatever that first week 1 situation was, it was just like, wow, this guy doesn't know what he's doing out there. It was like a Madden situation. Anyway, all his coaching flaws led to Russ throwing only 16 touchdowns last year. Some of that is obviously Russ's fault as well. But not the greatest season for Mr. Wilson. 3 touchdowns on the ground. Limited through the air. In a former life, he's only 2 seasons removed from 4,200 yards and 40 touchdown passes in 2020. That was a good year. If you get anything resembling that guy back, especially at 5,900, 7,300 going into this week, that's a pretty premium option. Definitely an uptick in what the offensive scheme should look like, if nothing else. Denver's 21st offensive DVOA projected, 17th defensive DVOA projected. Going to be working with Russ, going to be working with Javonte Williams, coming off of dual ligament tears in 2022, but did play in the preseason. He's also got Samaje Perine in there. Both of them can catch passes out of the backfield. Both of them can make things happen on the ground. I think it's one of those truly two-headed situations, especially early as Javonte kind of eases his way back into full-time action. I think it's more two-headed early. But Samaje gave you 4 touchdowns through the air last year. 287 yards, 5.63 yards per target. Javonte gave you 3.45 yards per target, only 76 yards. Gave you 15.8 touches a game, 51 rush yards a game, no touchdowns on the ground. 57-65, playable part at worst. I'm more interested in the passing game here, I think. Jerry Jeudy's got to get out there. Hamstring injury in camp. Was out for a while. Was supposed to be a bigger injury, miss a few weeks. Now he's kind of borderline, may or may not go, says it's up to him, so on and so forth. It's probably going to be a game time decision. I don't know if we get it tonight. I don't know what time tomorrow we get it. But I think if Jerry Jeudy's out there, that's obviously a big uptick for this offense. It's a premium weapon for Russ to work with. 11.5 yard ADOT, 6.7 targets per game last year. Interesting enough player and a lot of talent. 972 yards, 6 touchdowns. 11.5 yard ADOT with a 5.9 yard after the catch per catch. So definitely weapon number one out there in the passing game for Russ for sure. You do have Cortland Sutton still there. Sutton gave us 12.3 yard ADOT. Another guy who's an effective deep weapon. He'll pick up targets if Jerry Jeudy doesn't play. When Jeudy wasn't playing, high 20% target share last year, but only got in the end zone 2 times in that situation. Overall, Cortland Sutton for 5,200, 5,900 though, like I said, gives you some deep looks. Got in the end zone twice overall, 829 yards, 7.61 yards per target. Not uninteresting in the passing game, especially for cheap pricing. I think you can play him alongside Jerry Jeudy if Judy's out there. I think you can play him on his own. You can play him in stacks, obviously, as the primary. Marvin Mims, pretty interesting here. Probably going to pick up some popularity. Not the sneakiest of names. Definitely getting a little buzz. They traded up to get him. Second round pick, so there's a lot of draft capital, especially when they trade up to go get you. That's putting a lot of draft capital in there. 4.38 40 time, deep threat. 1,083 yards and 6 touchdowns on 54 catches at Oklahoma in 13 last year. 9 touchdowns as a freshman in 2020 for 3,470. If Jerry Jeudy doesn't play, that becomes a major source of value. It's already a pretty good source of value. Even if he's their number 3, it's a good source of value. But if it goes up and if he moves up the depth chart, that's a major, major option. And I do think they're going to be flinging the ball around the field a fair amount. So I like that spot. I'm going to have him anyway, even if Jeudy goes. I'll have him in combination with Jeudy. I'll have him on his own in stacks. A playable guy just to click into a lineup if you just need you're at the dead minimum and you just need a receiver, or you're at 3,000, you just need a receiver. 47 on FanDuel, you just need a receiver. Viable guy at that price point. Greg Dulcich, outsnapped in the preseason by Adam Troutman, who comes over from New Orleans. More familiar name for the coach. Don't know if I like either one of the options at tight end all that much. Dulcich outprojects him. He's more expensive. 5.5 targets a game last year. Did give us 2 touchdowns, 411 receiving yards. Not a great option. On the other side of things, we got Jimmy G to work with. Low ceiling, get you through the day kind of a guy. 5,300, 6,600. Like I said, Devontae could bring out the best in even a mediocre quarterback. Where is he? There he is. 6.9 intended air yards per pass attempt, though. Not exactly looking deep. Wasn't really in a situation to throw the ball deep all that often, but only 16 touchdown passes. Just kind of limited. Taking over the reins here. Does have some Devontae to work with. Devontae, premium receiver. I'm probably more into the idea of just Devontae on his own than I am really going to too many Jimmy G as my quarterback and Jimmy G focused stacks just so that I can get to Devontae. I'm much more likely to have Devontae as a run back in a Russ stack. I'm much more likely to just have Devontae in a wide receiver or a flex spot in just any random lineup. He's supremely talented. 100 yards plus in both games against Denver last year. In the last 3 years, working backward, 14 touchdowns, 11 touchdowns, 18 touchdowns. Pretty significant contributor anytime he's on the field. 11.8 yard ADOT last year. Deep target, 14 TDs, 1,516 yards, 8.42 yards per target. Superstar receiver. 79 feels a little inexpensive. 82, fairly priced. Not inexpensive. I'm thinking FanDuel numbers when I said 79 is inexpensive. But definitely appropriately priced for his overall talent. Josh Jacobs on the ground for them. Definitely a star. He crossed that threshold. There's a magic number. I forget what the total is. 315 carries or something like that. There's some kind of magic number that if a running back crosses that, he's never going to be the same again, like demonstrably throughout NFL history. And Josh Jacobs went like 20% beyond that last year. So I don't really know what to expect. I certainly don't expect the same overall output. 97.2 yards a game last year on 23.1 touches a game. 12 touchdowns. Should still be very good. I'm not saying he's definitely going to come out here and fall off the table. Could certainly defy the odds. But that many touches, not typically good for running backs the next year. 12 TDs, 9 TDs, 12 TDs, 7 TDs in the last 4 years going backward in time. 1,000 plus yards in 3 of those 4 seasons. 1,600 plus yards last year. A beast in the running game. Projects out really well. Fairly priced. I'm not trying to diminish the Josh Jacobs play in any way here. I think you play him on his own. You don't necessarily build him into your stacks with Jimmy G and Devontae Adams. He does work as a high-volume runner, coming back as a run-back play against this stack on his own, but a little bit less appealing that way. I just kind of like him to drop into a few lineups with these guys and then just be a floating running back who falls into lineups with other quarterbacks, other stacks, just as a very high-end runner. And we just hope that he gets the TDs and gets the red zone work here. Some mix and match parts in the passing game for Vegas. Jacoby Myers coming over here now. Myers signed a 3-year to join McDaniels and Jimmy G. Tons of targets in New England. Lower in the pecking order behind Adams, behind Jacobs, and his volume that he gets on the ground. Probably stepping into the Mac Hollins role, in which he had 1,100 air yards, tons of routes, 9.9 yard ADOT, 6 touchdowns. There's reason to believe that Jacoby Myers could step into at least a decently high volume role with some deep looks. Right, 6 TDs, 9.9 yard ADOT, not bad. As a deep shot, as a potential weapon when they're not looking to Devontae, he's at least on the board. The guy I'm actually more interested in is Hunter Renfrow. Starting in the slot in 11 personnel. He's the clear number 3 overall behind Adams and Myers, but I think that renders him under-owned. 4,600, 5,300 across sites. 2022, he played 10 games, went 36 of 50 for 330 yards, 2 touchdowns, lost a lot of time to injuries. In 2021, he saw 128 targets. He caught 80+% of them, 103 catches, 1,038 yards, 9 touchdowns. That is an interesting slot receiver. Playing with a guy who might just be looking to that spot. If you can't find Devontae down the field, if you can't find Jacoby Myers down the field, get me some Hunter Renfrow. 6.8 yard ADOT. 6.6 yards per target. In the end zone just twice last year, like I said. Injury shortened season. But if we're going by those 21 numbers for these prices, in a game with a decent total, that works for me. I like Renfrow a lot as a sneaky run back play in a stack of Russ. Give me Russ. If it's Jerry Jeudy, it's Jerry Jeudy. If it's Marvin Mims, it's Marvin Mims. Give me Russ and one of his receivers. Give me Hunter Renfrow on the other side of that. I'm saving money. I've got a little bit of touchdown equity. I've got a little bit of yardage. I like my position there. And I'm building from a cheap contrarian position in stacks that people will be playing. Anytime you can get to an alternative in stacks that people are already going to, you're gaining leverage. Mama, you got it, buddy. Mama says, thanks for adding the how-to fantasy cruncher video in the article. Yeah, that's when I went and pulled the framework from the old place. That link was still in there. I was going to take it out because it's from something I did over at the old place, but it's up on YouTube. It was my content, and I felt like there was a lot of value in leaving it there, even though it's all Stochastic branded, Stochastic linked, and promos and everything. I left the link to the old video in my article, so if you want an hour-long refresher, if you haven't heard enough of my sonorous voice so far tonight, you can certainly pull that up and get the ins and the outs for everything that's talked about in that group's article. Literally showing you like click by click how to set it up specifically for Fantasy Cruncher. So yeah, I did leave that in there intentionally for you guys, Mom. But you're welcome. Glad you caught that. Thank you for bringing it up. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Rotoscouts is the site. Everything is free. Week 1 projections are free. Rankings for every position, for scoring and for value are free. The groups and stacks article is free. There's a lot of depth in there. I'm basically telling you how to build lineups. Not that you guys need me to tell you how to build lineups, but I'm telling you how I'm going to be building lineups. Let's put it that way. All right. This is a conversation. You guys share information with me. I share it right back with you guys. You guys give me tons and tons of feedback. So this is not me telling you how to build lineups. It's me sharing the way that I approach these things. It's a better way to put it. I never like making it like I know more than you guys. It just makes me uncomfortable. Looking down the board, Michael Mayer. Interesting tight end option at 28.47. Steps into the role that Waller left behind, but he's certainly not Waller. 809 yards and 9 TDs on 67 catches at Notre Dame last year. It's not nothing. potentially a touchdown or nothing option. Very, very cheap. Worth finding out in an offense that did focus on the tight end quite a bit. They've also got Austin Hooper there. I expect more of the looks to go Mayer's way. Seems to be the general expectation. There's a couple other wild cards in the passing game here. They've got DeAndre Carter. He's been limited with a knee injury, questionable. They've got Marquez Callaway. I think if Carter doesn't go, Callaway gets an uptick. Probably still the fourth best wide receiver option. He had 6 TDs on 46 of 84 with New Orleans in 2021. Only 1 touchdown, 158 yards in 14 games on 16 of 32 with Denver last year. So pretty limited to the point where he's not even actually on the board that I'm looking at. He's just in my notes. I'll make a note of that. Gotta make sure that Marquez Callaway is getting a projection. Literally just writing things down at this point to make sure that I can remember them when I have to go update all these files. I'm going to sleep at some point, but I'm not sure when that's going to be. It might be Monday. Or it might just be through all these games tomorrow, which would suck. So I don't think we're really looking for Carter. I don't think we're necessarily looking for Callaway. He could be somewhat interesting, given the fact that he's got a little bit of talent, I think. But not really high priorities. Running behind Josh Jacobs in this offense is never really going to be all that appealing. I don't think there's really any reason to go to the Amir Abdullahs, the Zamir Whites of the world. 14 games last year for White, but only 17 carries, 70 yards. Likely number 2, saw snaps in the preseason, but again, behind a volume monster like Jacobs, there's just really no ceiling there at all. I think that's it for that one on the Vegas side. Talked about, I think, everybody on the Denver side. Talked about Samaji a little bit. Samaji's not uninteresting here. 51, 6,000. Guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield. It's just a question of how much they lean on Javonte coming back from that knee injury. Don't think we skipped anything. I have Hunter Renfrow on that list of interesting wideouts. He caught my attention. I like that spot a lot. Speaking of spots I like a lot, I think the entire field's going to be on this one, though. I don't really care. My lineups end up pretty much unique anyway. I gain leverage in other ways. I gain leverage by going to the weird plays down some of these depth charts, taking some shots. In million entry contests, you got to take some shots. You're going to need those plays to come through. And then you just want the good chalk around a lot of those plays some of the time. Comes down a lot of the time to, hey, the dart 1, dart 2 hit. Let me see if the chalk falls my way. Like I said at the top of the show, that's what we needed on that Thursday showdown. Chalk falls a different way on just one look in Amon-Ra's direction. I'm cashing 6 figures that day. We were off by a half a point or a point, whatever it was. But just, you want to break it down so that I've gained my leverage on the field through these 2 unique spots. And now I'm just, these plays that everybody's got, those go in my favor because I've already booked my difference. I've booked my differentiation already. That's really the key for lineup building here. Tons of offense expected in this one. Chargers, 3-point favorites at home. It's basically just the home field advantage. 51.5 total. I believe that's the highest on the board. Tons and tons of offensive potential. Obviously, major passing game threats. Major passing game threats. A lot of action here. Justin Herbert, supremely talented quarterback. 1 season removed from going for 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns in 2021. Not so bad. Last year, 25 touchdowns, 6.4 yards intended air yards per pass attempt, 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Working without Keenan Allen for a decent chunk of that. I like the upside for the Chargers offense here quite a bit. People irrationally don't like Keenan Allen. I actually wanted Jalen Waddle a pick or so, a couple picks before my turn in our draft. I was trying to get the spot. Somebody took him. I eventually took Keenan Allen at the end of that round. And then I was trying to wrangle trades, and I was like, I'll give you Keenan Allen, who I took a few picks later in similar round, or maybe it was the next round, whatever it was. And then I'll give you like this pick and that pick for 2 later picks after that. And it was just like, no, flat nose. Like, have I missed something with Keenan Allen not being pretty good? He's 31. I get that. He was injured last year. I get that. 8 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns the last 4 years. 2021, 16 games, 1,138 yards, 6 touchdowns. Last year, banged up, 10 games, 752 yards, 4 touchdowns. But still a pretty high-end receiver. Still going to be the one in this offense. Ahead of Mike Williams, who goes in and out of the lineup himself. Ahead of a rookie, Quentin Johnston. This is another one of those depth chart things, a little bit of coach speak going on, trying to obfuscate the situation a little bit. I do not buy that Josh Palmer is the number 4, or is the number 3 ahead of Quentin Johnston here. Quentin Johnston, 1,069 yards and 6 touchdowns in 14 games on 60 catches at TCU last year. 6'4" with a 4.3 40 time is intriguing. 21st overall pick. He's going to get some looks. Absolutely. Going to get some looks. Projects out pretty well. I like that option. You got to love the size, especially the size combined with the speed, the draft capital that went into him. That is interesting to me. Trey says, was just in chat over at ETR. Andrew's unlikely. Fire up likely. See what you did there. I like the likely play. My likely play at tight end is likely going to be likely. Assuming that Andrews is unlikely to play. Just to chime in with Trey there. Well done, buddy. That's good info. If Andrews doesn't go, that's a sneaky good spot. Kind of intrigued by that. Obi-Wan nails it. Renfro's a beast when healthy. I'm with you. Coming out of the slot there, I love that spot. That is a sneaky good spot. But this one's just, this is an obvious one. People are going to be all over this game. But I think it's key parts. Tua. Well, let me keep rolling, keep it in order here. Mike Williams, up and down performances in and out of lineups from time to time. 12-yard ADOT only costs 5,700, 7,100. More affordable on the DK slate, but on the FanDuel board for sure. Last season, to go with the average depth of target, four touchdowns, 895 yards, 9.62 yards per target, though, is not nothing. 5.1 yards after the catch. Get the ball in his hands, he can make some things happen. Pairing him up with Quentin Johnston and all that speed and size. Keenan Allen on the other. Like, this is a three-headed monster now. That is potentially a really good passing attack. Throwing some Gerald Everett at the tight end. Throwing the idea that Joshua Palmer is there and is getting talked up as though he is the number 3. Like I said, I don't really buy it. Palmer last year, 6.7 targets. Oh, God damn it, is he Josh? There's another one. Josh. Ooh. 6.7 targets, turned it into 3 touchdowns, 769 yards, 7.19 yards per target, 8.7 yard ADOT. I just think, why they're not going to take this kid where they took him, have all that talent available, and screw us over by throwing the ball to Josh Palmer, are they? Are they? I don't think so. Everett, touchdown kind of matters for his upside. Dolphins weren't good against tight ends last year. 4 touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons. 555 yards was a career high on 87 targets last year. 5.8 targets a game. Got in the end zone 4 times. It's all right. Decent production there. A playable part, if nothing else, at tight end. So all 3 of the receivers here are going to be in my pool for shares with Herbert. They can get 2 of them at the same time. Get 1 of them with Everett. I'm fine with those constructions. Palmer will be in that pool as well. Less so on the running backs, but Eckler is definitely on the board, on the field, and a premium part of this offense. Overall volume will probably be a little bit down with the receiving, probably picking up a little bit more focus on the passing game, but he's a high-end number 1 overall. Should get a decent amount of touches. Last year, 18.3 touches per game, 53.8 yards per game, got in the end zone 13 times on the ground, got in the end zone another 5 times through the air. Effective option, 5.69 yards per target, 722 yards and 5 TDs, 7.5 targets a game. That's putting the ball in his hands quite a bit. Now, given again that Keenan Allen's back, Mike Williams is healthy, Quentin Johnston is here, Everett, Palmer, there's some mouths to feed, but Eckler is a premium running back and projects like it. A little bit higher projection on the DK slate given the catches. Got to get him, of course, but I think the volume will be enough to support the projection and the differential in the half point versus point PPR. Josh Kelly is the backup running back. 14 of 25 in the air last year. Zero touchdowns, only 101 yards. No receiving touchdowns in 3 years. 287 rushing touchdown on 69 carries, or 287 rushing yards, on 69 carries with 2 TDs last year. On the depth chart ahead of Isaiah Spiller. Spiller, draft pick out of Texas A&M. Another name on here, but I mean, I think these guys are just going to be limited by the presence of this guy. Is really the situation that we're dealing with. So I don't really think we're going down lineup fishing for running backs on this team. I'm much more content to take down lineup shots with receivers than I am with running backs because it just becomes a volume issue. Receiver gets on the field for 10% of the snaps, but gets his 2 deep targets and converts one of them. You don't need that much volume for a receiver. For a running back, you pretty much need that volume. You need these guys to get some touches, get the carries. If Spiller does get some looks, 6 games last year, injury issues. So he was out of Texas A&M 2 years ago. His last year at A&M, 1,011 yards, 6 touchdowns on 179 carries. He was a 3-year feature back, 946 yards and 10 TDs on 174 carries as a freshman, 9 touchdowns on 188 carries as a sophomore. Probably a better option than Joshua Kelly. Remains to be seen. In the 6 games last year, no rushing touchdowns, only 6.8 rush yards per game. Not a lot of volume. 3.5 touches a game. Not a lot of action last year. Raheem Mostert on the Miami side in terms of the ground game before we get into the pass game there, which is the more interesting part of the Miami side, just because I'm looking at Raheem Mostert's name and it jumped out at me. 54-59 should be the top option. Jeff Wilson's hurt, but he's got Devon Arcane chasing him. Career high 891 yards on 181 attempts, but only 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 more through the air. 31 and 42 for 202 yards through the air last year. Just kind of a is who he is type guy. He projects out okay for the money, 54-59. Moderately playable option. Devon Arcane, 3rd round rookie, banged up in the preseason, supposed to be okay now. 1,102 yards and 8 touchdowns at Texas A&M last year after he took over the role from Isaiah Spiller, who left it the year before. In 2021, when they were both there, 910 yards on 130 carries in a dual-headed backfield situation, 9 touchdowns. So a capable enough back, but I just don't know what the touches are going to look like. It's probably a 2-headed situation, in which case I kind of don't want either of these guys. I just want my shots with the passing game for this offense, and I think everybody's probably with that take. Mamba says, hey, Tar, my take based on the sets that they have is Eckler will have the ceiling game for the Chargers. I have him with 2 on the ground and 1 in the air. That'd be awesome. I'm going to have my Eckler shares either way, so I'll definitely take that. There is support for the idea of getting Eckler into your Chargers stacks, though, given the volume through the air, given the upside for a passing touchdown and a connection with Herbert. Definitely a playable running back, one of the more playable running backs within your stacks, where we normally prefer to go to the pass catchers. But he is a pass catcher of a running back for sure. On the Miami side, Tua, if he stays on the field, could have a monster season. He's obviously got 2 of the better weapons in the entire league to work with when it comes to the receiving pool. 6,700, 7,000. Very cheap. I'm going to have my shots with him for sure. For his talent, for his ceiling, I think that's a cheap price to go to. 9.5 implied air or intended air yards per pass attempt last season. 13 games overall, gave us 25 TDs, 8 interceptions, 21 sacks. He's not a mobile quarterback at all. 61 sacks in his 3 seasons so far. Probably plays into some of the concussion issues. 3,500 yards last year. Not the greatest yard total, but again, only 13 games, 25 TDs. Just hit these guys a couple times, and we should be home. It's really all he's got to do. Tyreek Hill, one of the just clear-cut top options on the slate in terms of talent, in terms of output. He's still only 29. He has never scored fewer than the 6 touchdowns he scored as a rookie. He had 7 last year. He had 9 the year before while still with KC. Peaked at 15 on 1,276 yards, going 87 for 135 in 2020. He's a target monster. He's efficient. In 2021, 111 of 159 targets. Caught 111 of them. Last year, caught 119 out of 170 targets for 1,700 yards. Just a monster out there. Jalen Waddle, just absurd speed. Something that I was looking through when I was Googling. I didn't have time to confirm it. Some camp day at college back in 2017 apparently ran a 4:09.40. That's bananas if that's true. That is fast. Ludicrous speed. 117 targets last year, 140 as a rookie in 2021. 1,015 yards and 6 touchdowns in the rookie year. Improved on it with 1,356 yards, 8 touchdowns in 17 games last year. 75 of 117 receiving last year. Excellent option for a little bit cheaper than his counterpart, Tyreek Hill on the other side. They project out great. They're 2 lead receiving options. If you can get them both into a stack with Miami, I like that. I'm perfectly fine with playing them both along with Tua. Again, I prefer to go to the single man stacks, but there's plenty of support for the deep passes. There's plenty of support with yards after catch, touchdown upside, yardage upside. What's not to love? What's not to love? Maybe some of the later in the depth chart receivers like Braxton Berrios. Number 3 on the depth chart, 5 touchdowns in 4 years with the Jets. 0 last year on 18 of 32 for 145 yards. In 2021, he caught 431 yards worth of passes, 46 of 65, 2 touchdowns. 3 touchdowns in 2020 as a rookie, 394 yards, 37 of 55. Very limited output. He's only 5'9", 185. A gamey kind of a guy, slippery, maybe is the right word. But just doesn't get the ball in his hands enough. Don't love the option. He's very cheap, $3,000, $4,800. If he gets you in the end zone at those prices, you're home. That's all we need is just get me in the end zone. But he doesn't get in the end zone all that often, not all that efficiently. Eric Ezukanma, 4th round pick this year out of Texas Tech. 4 TDs on 48 catches in 11 games last year at Texas Tech, 706 yards. 2021, 6 touchdowns, 46 catches in 10 games. Moderate output at Texas Tech. Probably due for moderate output in the show, whatever we want to call it, in the pros, in the NFL. I'm used to saying in the show from baseball. Probably not enough upside to play him from the bottom of the depth chart here. Obviously doesn't project like there's any upside. If somebody happens to go out, maybe. River Carcraft got in the end zone twice last year, 9 of 14 for 102 yards. Another guy that's just kind of an afterthought on the depth chart here. We don't really need to talk too much about some of these depth options. Durham Smythe, a little bit interesting as a value tight end, 2,800, 4,600. Enough potential there as a part of this offense. Got in the end zone once last year. 129 yards. Low volume. Cheap tight end. Only got 1.5 looks per game last year. Just very low targets. You need him to get in the end zone. Talked about Tua, Hill, Waddle. Talked about the running game. Ced Wilson. Did I talk about Ced Wilson? I think I did. I remember calling him Ced. No touchdowns last year. 136 yards. Talked about all these guys. Yeah, think we got this one down. Like both sides of this one. Gonna have stacks of both sides of this one. Premium options on both sides. Give me some Herbert with one of his receivers or Tua with one of his. Either way, I want one of these 4 guys. Right? My priorities. These 3 and those 2. One guy out of this group and one guy out of that group should be in almost every version of a stack from this game. Whether or not you've got Herbert or Tua in your quarterback spot, grab the correlated guy on their team and grab some correlation from the other side. Odds are this one shoots out. That's what Vegas is seeing. There's only there's Austin Eckler, who's also actually should be on that list too. Limited rushing on this side should support the idea of a pass-focused game. A lot of action through the air. A lot of scoring potential. Take shares on both sides. Be wary of your combinations, your ownership, how it all comes together. You don't want to walk down the exact same construction path as everybody else. They're going to be popular, but for a reason. They're worth it. Pats and the Eagles. Eagles 24.5 total, 3.5 point favorites, 44-point game at New England. Ramondre Stevenson is probably the most interesting player on the New England team for me. I do think he's a kind of a beast of a running back play for 7,000 on both sites. 16.4 touches a game last year. Got in the end zone 5 times, 61.2 yards a game. Saw some looks, 1 touchdown, 421 yards, 5.2 targets a game. Gets a little action out of the backfield. Interesting option there. Tough matchup. Philly's going to dominate this one in the trenches. Philly is obviously the better of these teams. 4th projected offensive DVOA, 9th projected defensive DVOA for Philly. So anything from New England is kind of going to be going into a buzzsaw, but I'll at least take the big cannonball and like throw it at the saw and hope that I can like hit the saw right on the thing and bend it and knock it out of the thing so that it goes flying off that way. Kills the guys that are holding us hostage. Swings around the room. It's getting really elaborate at this point. Ramondre Stevenson is that kind of a guy. I do think there's a lot of upside there. 69 of 88 targets last year. That's a lot of target volume for a running back. 421 yards, just the 1 touchdown. 1,040 yards total on 210 carries with the 5 touchdowns on the ground. Featured player in their backfield for sure. Zeke Elliott's there. He didn't play in the preseason. I'm assuming just kind of a touchdown-dependent option at 52, 54. I don't really know what to make of Zeke at this point, other than the fact that I don't think I want him. I really don't see much path to success against this D. If he gets there this week, then fine. I'll take the loss, and I'll take it as lesson learned that Zeke Elliott will have something to do. But just really not something that I'm going to worry about here. I'm much more inclined to, if I don't go to Ramondre Stevenson, maybe take a few shares of Mac Jones. 2021, he had 3,800 yards, 22 TDs, but 13 interceptions, sacked 28 times. Not the greatest season in the world. Not the greatest output in the world last year. 7.9 intended yards, 14 touchdowns, intended air yards, 14 touchdowns. Not the greatest receiving core to work with previously. This year, he's got Juju Smith-Schuster joining him. Juju, his best season was 2018. It was the only time he went over 1,000 yards. He had 7 touchdowns that year and in his rookie year. He had 9 touchdowns in 2020, but only 831 yards. Caught 97 of 128 passes with Pittsburgh. Last season, caught 78 of 101 looks, 933 yards, but only got in the end zone 3 times with KC. That's tough. It's not exactly an upgrade of passing game going from KC to New England with Mac Jones. Kind of a downgrade. Talented enough guy, but a guy that we saw fail to get in the end zone, fail to deliver true performances for DFS purposes over and over and over again. I don't love the spot. Same thing for Devontae Parker. Kind of limited output since 2019. He is the number 2 on the depth chart. He is cheap at 41.52. Saw 3.6 targets per game last year. 15.9 yard ADOT is at least appealing. Deep shots down the field is, for a cheap price. Support the idea of upside for the Philly side of stacks. Maybe better as a cheap run back. 3 touchdowns last year, 539 receiving yards. Limited option. Kendrick Bourne, similar kind of a guy. Limited overall option. 3,300, 4,900 is the wide receiver 3. 434 yards and 1 touchdown in 16 games last year. 5 TDs in 17 games in 2021. 800 yards that year. 70 targets that year, only 48 targets last year. So his volume cut. Not going to pick up volume with Juju joining the party here. Zeke Elliott to feed. I just prefer, if I'm going to a secondary receiver here, it's probably going to just be Hunter Henry. Mike Gesicki's here now, but issues with his shoulder all through camp. Hunter Henry supposedly develops a connection with Jones. He had 9 TDs in 2021 on 603 yards, 50 of 75 receiving in that decent year in this offense. Last year, highest targeted season, 93 targets, caught 60 of them. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I got to read these full sentences before I say these things or write them differently. His last year with the Chargers in 2020, 60 of 93, scored 4 touchdowns that year. An okay enough option. Not great. Gesicki, 32-48, probably not going to get on the field. Kind of an even distribution of fantasy points if he does play. Maybe a little bit of an uptick for Hunter Henry, but not significant. Again, going up against a pretty stout defense. Not my favorite play by any means. Philly will dominate this game, says Mamba. I absolutely think so. Mamba thinks it'll be a shutout. Shutout is a stretch, but, Philly, a very, very good defense. Obviously high up on the board in terms of playability for defense. Solid 6.71 projection. Definitely a very playable part on defense. And, yeah, not a lot of upside for the New England side of things. Not by any means. They're carrying a 20.5 implied total. On the Eagles side, star power in Jalen Hurts. Everything he does. He's got a little bit of an improved running game around him this year. DeAndre Swift into town. Rashad Penny and Kenneth Gainwell there. So a lot of options in the ground game. Could be Boston Scott also there. So kind of a four-headed monster. Could be problematic in terms of the running backs themselves and where the ball goes. But in terms of supporting Jalen Hurts and his efforts in the passing game, I like the fact that they've got a lot of viable running backs. He's got A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith as well as Dallas Goedert to work with. Plenty of options in the passing game. He's also got some darts in Quez Watkins, Olamide Zacchaeus. Interesting options to throw to here outside of just the two obvious guys. Overall, Hurts last year, 22 passing touchdowns, added 13 rushing touchdowns, 760 yards, 784 yards on 139 carries for 10 touchdowns the year before. 3,701 yards and 22 TDs last year, 3,144 yards and 16 the year before. Remember when I said, they brought him along gradually, kind of unleashed him more and more as the time went on when I was talking about Anthony Richardson. I think that's kind of the output that you can expect from Richardson. This is kind of the template. 9 interceptions in 15 games last year, sacked 38 times. Mobile quarterback, throws the ball well, plenty of weapons to work with. I like the spot a lot. I think you build around Jalen Hurts in stacks. Makes a lot of sense to me. 11 touchdowns for the second time in his career for A.J. Brown last year. Monster season, 88 catches on 145 looks, almost 1,500 yards. In 2021, he had 63 catches, 5 touchdowns in 13 games, 3 straight years of over 100 targets, 7,600, 8,100. He's even pretty fairly priced. Not overly expensive for A.J. Brown. Devonta Smith, a solid 1A behind him. Back-to-back years over 100 targets for him. Playing last year alongside A.J. Brown, still saw 100 targets. 64 of 104, 5 touchdowns in 2021, 916 yards. Last year, 95 of 136. So his targets went up despite the fact that A.J. Brown was playing alongside him last year. 1,196 yards and 7 touchdowns. Brown gets deeper targets, 9.6 yard ADOT to Smith's 6.1. Both are highly effective. Both are playable together. I like them better individually. I like them better as, individual plus Hurts and maybe Goddard in stacks. I prefer going to one of them and Goddard than both of them together, but they're very playable. All three of those guys are in play. Just rotate through the three primary pass catchers. Quez Watkins, if you start looking down lineup a little bit here, 9-yard ADOT last year, 15 yards per catch average on 43 of 62 with only 1 touchdown in 17 games. That was in 2021. I gotta get better at writing these notes. As I'm writing it, I'm like, I'll just remember this shit in what order it's supposed to go in. And then it's like, yeah, that's one of like 1,000 entries, idiot. 33 of 51 with 3 touchdowns last year on 10.7 yards per catch. So the yards per catch average is pretty solid. The ADOT is pretty solid. 4th year in the Philly offense. A viable deep shot. Not a guy who succeeds all that often for us. But I'm interested enough in some deep shots, especially with an offense that I'm going to have a lot of, as a differentiation piece. Get me away from the public builds. Get me away from the, I took AJ and I put Dallas in. I took Devonta, I put Dallas in. I took AJ and put the Devonta in. Give me some of these guys. Primarily Quez. A lot less so Zacchaeus. Number 4 on the depth chart for Olamide. 3.6 targets a game last year. 3 touchdowns, 533 yards, but an 11.5 yard ADOT. So another guy, potentially a deep threat. 2 or 3 looks. Might only need 1. Not a good player. Not a high-end option, but he's very, very cheap in a high-end offense. If you look to the ground game here, I don't know that we really should. DeAndre's going to be the lead back, but it's probably only by a little over the just kind of alternatives here. He's stepping into kind of the Miles Sanders role, but he's got Gainwell and Penny in it with Boston Scott following. He had 5 touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons in Detroit, 8 as a rookie in 2020. 617-yard peak. A little bit of upside in the passing game. 389 yards and 3 touchdowns last year in the passing game on 70 targets. 62 of 78 for 452 yards and 2 touchdowns the year before. Similar production the year before as a rookie. A capable enough guy. Feels like he never fully landed at star caliber and probably never will, but there's talent there. I just don't know how much Penny cuts into it. I don't know how much Gainwell cuts into it. Gainwell, good runner and a passer, pretty cheap. probably the RB2. Last year, 4.5 touches a game. Rashad Penny came to this offense, 12.2 touches a game last year, 69.2 yards per game, 2 touchdowns. Gainwell had 4 touchdowns last year. Even if these guys are just poaching touchdowns, poaching a couple targets, it's not great. Boston Scott probably not going to get any volume until one of these guys gets banged up and is out of the lineup. But does have sneaky touchdown upside, if nothing else, from time to time. Talked about Quez, talked about the receivers on the New England side of things. Oh, I skipped Keishon Boutte from New England. 6th round pick out of LSU. 2 touchdowns in 11 games on 48 receptions, 538 yards at LSU. 9 touchdowns the year before. A little bit of potential there. If you want to go further down the list on the New England side of things, 79 catches on 993 yards and 6 touchdowns at Liberty for Demario Douglas. 6 touchdowns and 701 yards the year before. 6th round, 210th overall pick, 5'8", 179 pounds. That's around my height, and well, he's in better shape than I am. Dallas Goedert, premium tight end when he's healthy. 12 games last year, 15 the year before, 11 the year before that. Looking down the line for Dallas Goedert. 5.8 targets a game when he was healthy last year, turned it into 702 yards, 3 touchdowns. We know that Dallas Goedert's an end zone threat, if nothing else. For 5,000, 6,400, whenever he's on the field, I'm happy to go to Dallas Goedert. Talked about the ground game. Ramondre is my priority from the New England side of things. Ramondre works for me as a run back play in Philly stacks. If I've got Jalen, AJ, and like Quez or something like that, something weird like that, and I just get Ramondre off the top rather than a Juju or a Devontae, I'm happy with that. That works for me. Philly's D, definitely playable. New England's probably not. Projects out competitively in the way that these projections work. Some fairly talented guys on that D. They do rank 12th by projected defensive DVOA. So not an untalented bunch. 3,500 versus 4,600 defense versus defense. So a little bit of a discount, but odds are they're going to blow up this team. 44 runs. 44 point total in Vegas. Firmly favor the Philly side. I don't think we need that much of the New England defense, but they're cheap and capable, and defense plays are weird anyway. 3 games to go, gang. It's 10:30. That was a surprise. This has been going on for 3 hours. It goes fast. Holy hell. We are blowing our way through prime time and approaching Saturday Night Live time. Not yet ready for prime time players. Got some ready for prime time players in this game. I don't know that either of them are necessarily the quarterbacks, but certainly a Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel. I like some Deontay Harris on this side. Some interesting options in this game. The quarterbacks need to deliver in this one for this to really work out. Outside of McCaffrey, who does need a little bit of support from the passing game to truly see his success for the high totals. Quarterbacks are going to have to give us a little something here. Kenny Pickett sacked 27 times last season, 7 TD passes, 9 interceptions in 13 games. Supposedly having a high-end preseason. 5,200, 6,600. 7.5 intended air yards per pass attempt, only 6.2 yards per pass attempt, 7 TDs last year. Not the greatest output in the world. Supported by Deontay Johnson, who I do like in the passing game. Deontay put up 0 touchdowns last year, which people are overreacting to. I believe that there's talent here. He still saw 147 targets last year and caught 87 of them for 882 yards in a down season. But I mean, that is volume, and that's an okay catch rate. Not an ideal catch rate. Too many drops in there, and not getting in the end zone. But the year before, 169 targets, 107 catches, 1,161 yards, and 8 touchdowns. In 2020, 7 touchdowns on 88 of 144 and 923 yards. As a rookie in 2019, 5 touchdowns on 59 of 92, 680 yards. There's major upside with positive regression expected for touchdowns. At a point, I don't care that he didn't score touchdowns last year. He still had volume. He's like last year's inability to score touchdowns has very little bearing on his ability to take one of these balls and get in the end zone this year. 10.2 yard ADOT. That's a premium weapon. Kenny Pickett's got to be able to hit him, but it's a premium weapon. George Pickens, high point of 8 targets. Never saw more than 6 targets after week 6. 14.5 yard ADOT though. 4 touchdowns. That can play. 801 total yards. That can play. 5,000, 5,800. 4.9 targets a game. Allen Robinson. Yes, that Allen Robinson. 3,700, 5,100. Third on the depth chart. Slot, probably going to play out of the slot. 30 years old now. 6 touchdowns back in 2020 was his most recent good season. Played 10 games last year, 12 games in 2021. 2019 and 2020 had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with 7 touchdowns and 6 touchdowns. He's probably on the back end of the career, not playing with the greatest quarterback in the world, on a team with a 41.5 point total for the game, going up against a 5th-ranked projected defensive DVOA team in San Francisco. I don't love it for Allen Robinson. That's Allen Robinson II, who was followed on the depth chart by Calvin Austin III. Calvin Austin, 3,000, 4,300. Big play ability on display during the preseason, apparently. I told you guys I didn't really watch the preseason, so that's just kind of in my notes. 5'9", 162 pounds, but a 4.3, 240 time. I don't really know what to make of that. That is really small, but it's also really fast. 74 catches for 1,149 yards, 8 touchdowns in 2021 at Memphis, 63 for 1,053 yards and 11 touchdowns the year before that. 4th round pick, so a little bit of draft capital invested. Missed all of his rookie year with a foot injury, so maybe a sneaky option. I think he won the punt return job, so maybe he's a mix in with the Steelers D, which is a fairly playable defense. On the board, lightly. Not a crazy go-to option, obviously not projecting well. But for the money, might get a couple of looks. Talent there, but again, the size worries me. A lot of talent, a lot of speed. Got to run past people because he's not going to be able to see the ball over them. And they're going to be able to, just gentle breeze knock him down. Michael Knack. Terry's voice is butter. 3 hours go quick. 3 hours go quick. I will dispute the Terry's voice is butter part of it. Michael Knack says we're not worthy. You're all worthy. Please. I'm not worthy of you guys hanging out with me and giving me all the love and all of that, and the likes and the subscriptions and hopefully the retweets. Do me that favor if you guys will. If you want to show love, just go over to the @rotoscouts Twitter handle. Just give that little thing with the free projections. Give that a retweet. It's the only one. That one's it's pinned at the top of the Rotoscouts profile. If you give that a retweet or a little bit of a like, I would appreciate it. Just get it in front of some eyeballs. Let them know that we're out here. I feel like DFS projections is going to be like a frantic search for a lot of people on Google tomorrow morning. So we'll pick up a few newcomers. The Pittsburgh ground game. Najee Harris. San Francisco only allowed 7 rushing touchdowns last year. They were very good at limiting rush yards as well. Got Jalen Warren in the mix. Might cut into his overall touches. He is a talented running back for sure. So 3.1 targets, 18.1 touches a game last season. Scored 7 touchdowns, 60.8 yards per rush attempt or per game. 3.8 yards per rush attempt. Got in the end zone 3 times through the air last year, 229 yards, 5.1 yards after the catch. Not bad at doing something with the ball after it's in his hands through the air. Just a really stiff competition in terms of the defense that he's going to be running into. So really, even though he's correctly priced, really not a premium play for me. Not one of my favorite ones. I think he's got to get in the end zone. It could be a situation where Kenny and the receivers drive them down the field to the 15 and then Najee takes it from there and he ends up scoring 2 or 3 touchdowns. But I really don't see that happening. That is a really thin path to success. So I don't really like it. Jalen Warren, 4,600, 5,100, 77 carries in 379 yards last year, 1 touchdown in 16 games. In 2021 at Oklahoma State, 11 touchdowns, 1,216 yards in 14 games. Undrafted free agent, small size, not overly fast with a 4.55 40 time, but he's a warm body who's going to probably see at least a few touches. 6.4 touches a game last year, 2.1 targets. 1 time in the end zone on the ground. Didn't get in the end zone through the air. Limited option. So it's like limited, kind of just up and down the lineup here. Pat Freiermuth on the at the tight end. One of the more interesting options in the passing game for Pittsburgh. Probably going to be a little bit popular. He was like that. I waited on tight end. Oh, shit, now it's a total disaster if I don't get Pat Freiermuth. I hope nobody picks him. Watch the next 3 picks go by, and then you take him kind of a guy. He was that guy in season-long drafts. So I think he maybe gets a little bit popular on just name recognition as that last man off the board at the tight end position, or like last name of potential quality off the board. 79 targets and 7 touchdowns as a rookie in 2021, 497 yards. 98 targets last year, only 2 touchdowns, though. Caught 63 of 98. Tons and tons of targets. Obviously some upside there. 6.5 targets a game is definitely interesting from the tight end position. 732 yards. 8.3 yard ADOT. So downfield, potentially interesting tight end. But again, just Kenny Pickett throwing to him. Going up against a really good San Francisco defense. I don't really go to that one. McFarland, Darnell, a lot of low-end late lineup types down there. Nobody really worth getting into. Nobody I've even really got interesting notes on in that group, I don't think. Deontay's the priority out of that offense. San Fran side, Brock Purdy. Getting the full-time gig. Major breakout in the final 6 games. According to one of the blurbs I read over at Pros, who, again, I recommend their Week 1 breakdown. It's more geared towards season long, but they've got a lot of really good notes like this one, in which I found out that in the 6 games that Brock Purdy had his little breakout in, he didn't face a team that was better than 13th overall by DVOA. So, take the breakout for what it's worth from a kid who was picked, last in his draft? He's got weapons. He's got weapons on weapons. He's got weapons that could go in there and probably do a better job at quarterback than him. 2 of those guys. I think both Debo and Christian McCaffrey could probably play a better quarterback than Brock Purdy. Not necessarily. I mean, Purdy might be the guy that he seemed like at the end of the season last year, but either one of those guys could get in the backfield and throw the ball. McCaffrey, the volume came down a little bit after he arrived from Carolina, but one of the premium overall dual threats in all of football. Played a full 17 games last year, 1,139 yards on 244 carries, 8 touchdowns. Also caught 85 of 108 targets, 741 yards, 5 touchdowns between Carolina and San Francisco. From 2020 and 2021, he played just 3 games in 2020 and 7 in 2021. So obviously some banged up numbers, but back to form from what we saw in the superstar seasons of 2017 through 2019. So assuming we get health, assuming we get that guy, hyper productive option in this San Fran offense. 87.92, you're paying a premium to get to him, but there's tons and tons of value on the board today. So easy enough to get to. Look, see? McCaffrey, 1 touchdown pass, 100% completion rate, 31 intended air yards per pass attempt, 34 yards per pass attempt. Who's better at playing quarterback than Christian McCaffrey? I didn't actually know those were there when I said it. Debo, wide receiver. Not sure how many touches he ends up getting out of the backfield anymore. Probably loses rushing value. He had, in the 7 games with McCaffrey in the offense last year, he only had 19 total carries. But obviously a guy who is a multi-talented, dynamic player out there. 56 of 94 for 632 yards and 2 TDs receiving last year in 13 games. In 2021, career highs, 77 of 121 for 1,405 yards, 6 TDs through the air, another 8 rushing touchdowns and 365 yards on the ground. So a monster season that year, 14 total touchdowns, 17 and a half hundred yards. Monster. 5,500, 7,000. I don't know. I don't want to call it pricey on FanDuel, but it's a little bit high, given that I don't think we're getting the additional looks and touches and touchdowns out of the backfield. And there are a couple mouths to feed in this passing game and a question mark around Brock Purdy and an okay defense on the other side. 11th ranked defensive DVOA projection for Pittsburgh. 12th ranked offensive DVOA projection. It's a good game. 6-5 going up against 12-11. Not bad. Sounds like we're talking seeding. Speaking of seeding, Coco Gauff. U.S. Open winner, U.S. Open ladies champion. She rocks. She's awesome. Got to see her play. Got to see 3 out of the 4 finalists live when I went to the Open the other day. Pretty awesome. Just love watching tennis. Great sport. And this has been an amazing U.S. Open. AJ says, hey, Tara, how much do you factor weather in NFL? Only somewhat, like only if it's one of those extreme weather situations where something really funky is going to happen. Tons and tons of snow, tons and tons of rain, but these guys tend to play through a lot of rain. I don't really care that much about it. Typically, it gets taken care of already by Vegas anyway in the overall game totals. So if you see suspiciously high totals in games that might have weather, then maybe you temper expectations a little bit. Maybe you just, kind of cull what you can get to by just lowering exposure caps for that game. But I don't take games out just because of weather or concerns or like that. I think you can follow logical patterns too. All right, this is a situation where the weather's not going to allow them to throw the ball that much. So they're going to be grinding. So they're going to be handing the ball off a lot. So we're going to get to some of these running backs instead of some of these receivers. But it's not really my premium, main priority. Michael Knack says unless high winds, yeah, that's certainly something that can affect, a thrown pass if you're throwing into the wind twice as you change directions. Obviously can have an impact. But again, there's so many. These guys are in the NFL for a reason. They can play through the weather. There are tangible impacts that these things can have, but ultimately, when you starting to chop away at that oak, you can. This is a really clunky analogy. I don't know where I was going with that. When you really start piling things on to that, you can eventually just break it by trying to quantify too much. Especially with football, I kind of take a little bit of a keep it simple approach where I don't let too much creep in around the edges. I kind of keep it a little bit straightforward, get to my plays, get to my values, get to my builds. I think construction and opportunity is more important than some of that situational aspect. Lightning is a thing. Lightning's a thing, for sure. If they clear everybody off the field and they can't play because there's lightning, that's problematic. Like I said, a lot of mouths to feed in the San Francisco passing game. Brandon Ayuk, another guy that I flagged as a potentially very, very interesting option. Guy that gets overlooked. Last year, 78 of 114, 1,015 yards. Better receiver overall than Debo last year. 8 touchdowns. In 2021, he had 5 touchdowns on 826 yards. 84 targets, caught 56 of them. 748 yards, 5 touchdowns in 2020 as a rookie. 96 targets that year, caught 60 of them. Going to be lower owned than Debo. Less expensive than Debo. Projects out closer on DK. PPR. 6.7 targets a game versus Debo's 7.2. 8 touchdowns versus Debo's 2. 1,015 yards, 632 yards. Debo didn't play a full season. He was banged up. I get it. But Ayuk is a sneaky good receiver and an interesting option in that offense. 9.9 yard ADOT. Deepest ADOT available. Unless you want to count Ross Dwelly's 13.8 in what couldn't have been all that many targets. I like the Ayuk option a lot. Juwan Jennings, third-year wideout, 38 targets in 21, 56 targets last year, 1 TD last year, scored 5 touchdowns on 282 yards in 2021 on 38 targets. That's reasonably good. Very low-end, late depth chart guy, though. 3,300, 4,700. 3.5 targets a game last year. Only got in the end zone the one time. Ronnie Bell, 62 catches for 889 yards, 4 touchdowns in his final season at Michigan. 7th-round pick, though. Not a lot of investment in Ronnie Bell. Don't know if he gets on the field. Probably not going to roll him out there unless something happens to one of these guys. George Kittle, he's dealing with a groin. Ross Dwelly is the backup. If Kittle doesn't go, I expect it just more becomes the Debo, McCaffrey, Ayuk, and maybe Juwan Jennings show. Dwelly maybe gets a look or two. He'll be on the field, but he'll probably be the more limited member of that bunch. He did have that good ADOT, but only 1 target a game last year. I don't know how many overall targets this was, but 105 yards, 1 touchdown. But was a decent deep threat. I think most of that yards after catch and everything there and all came from 1 deep touchdown catch, if I remember looking at that box score correctly. What else? Talked about these guys. Ground game behind McCaffrey. Again, another situation where just, if you're going to a guy, looking to guys behind Christian McCaffrey, we're already dealing with pretty low volume. It's not a bad option with Elijah Mitchell there. He's just going to be so limited in terms of the available touches. 963 yards and 5 touchdowns on 207 carries in 2021, but kind of fell off the map. Last year, 9.6 touches a game, two touchdowns, no volume to speak of in the passing game. Kind of limited unless something happens to somebody else. Talked about all those guys. Covered the defense, covered the offense on both sides, covered the quarterbacks. I think we got this one. So this is much more taking shots with skill players, I think, from mostly the San Francisco side of things. Maybe a couple shots with Deontay. It's more limited in stacks. I'll have them. They'll be in the pool for sure. I don't take teams out of the overall lineup pool. But probably one of my lower end stacks. I'm more interested in one-offs around the players that I like than I am in stacking Brock Purdy and trying to pick off the skill players. So this one's a more source of skill players on both sides for me, but playable stacks. Tampa, Minnesota. The buried treasure on this one. Knew it was going to come late in the show. Forgot how late in the pecking order it was when we were working alphabetically, and we had to get down to the T's. Major source of upside. I mentioned at the top of the show, when we get outliers compared to the industry consensus, we're riding with them. That's how I approach NFL DFS for myself, and I'm not going to shortchange you guys by trying to put my thumb on the scale. And just because Kirk Cousins is 2 and change points lower across the industry, go in there and try and lower him just so I look right alongside everybody else's projections. I want to be right after the game. I want to be Rashee Rice right. I want to be Kirk Cousins right after this one. It's not exactly a huge difference in projections. I've got him a little bit ahead, but I love the spot. If you believe in Justin Jefferson, you have to at least believe a little bit in Kirk Cousins, because somebody's got to throw Justin Jefferson the ball. And I think we all believe in Justin Jefferson. If nothing else, that supports the idea of upside for this play. Jefferson, the top overall talent probably on the entire board today. 4th season in the league. His 3 seasons going back to his rookie year. 7 touchdowns, 1,400 yards on 88 of 125. Followed it up with 10 touchdowns in 2021. 1,600 yards. 108 catches and 167 targets. Then came out last year and said, that wasn't good enough. Scored 2 fewer touchdowns with only 8, but put up 1,809 yards on 128 of 184. Monster target share. Monster ability to catch the ball. Gets in the end zone like crazy. Just a premium wideout. They don't get better than Justin Jefferson. He was going in the top 3 picks in fantasy drafts all around the country for a very good reason. 10.1 ADOT, 4.9 yards after the catch, per catch, 1,809 yards. Like I said, 8 touchdowns, 9.83 yards per target. That's sick. Absolutely dominant option to pair with Kirk Cousins. I love that pairing. I think they've got some interesting pieces around that pairing, though. TJ Hawkinson, a completely capable tight end. 8.6 targets a game after the trade to Minnesota. 6 touchdowns last year, 4 in 2021, 6 in 2020. Total last year, 86 catches and 129 targets for 914 yards. TJ Hawkinson's a beast. Premium tight end option. 7.5 yard ADOT, 4.7 after the catch, 7.09 yards per target. 5,900, 7,200. You can play Hawkinson and Cousins on their own. You can definitely play Cousins, Jefferson, and Hawkinson. KJ Osborne, 5 TDs last year, 60 of 90, 7 touchdowns on 50 of 82 in 2021. Kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. 5 TDs, 650 yards total. 5 yards after the catch, 8.3 yard ADOT. Potential opportunity to step into a bigger role, but he's got Jordan Addison here now. Addison, 1st round pick, 23rd overall. 6 feet tall, but only 175 yards. 5,100, 5,500. That's a premium option for me in stacks of Cousins. I like that quite a bit. Getting KJ Osborne, though, at 4,300 compared to the rookie's 51 is not uninteresting. It's a closer gap on FanDuel, but it's not uninteresting. Give me the experience. Projects out somewhat similar on expectations of lower volume. Addison at USC last year, 875 yards on 59 catches in 11 games, 8 touchdowns. 2021, he played at Pitt, 1,593 yards, 17 touchdowns on 100 catches in 14 games that year. Pretty dynamic, dynamite option to add to this offense. Just jumps into that old Adam Thielen role. Down lineup, Brandon Powell hasn't scored a touchdown since putting up the only 2 of his career in 2020. Probably not an option. Very, very cheap. Doubt we get any volume. Jalen Naylor, 15 games, went 9 of 13 for 179 and a touchdown. 47-yard long receiving. Another guy, probably not that great an option. 11.6 yard ADOT, I guess. If we're looking for something to hang our hat on. Not great. Pretty low end once we get past the 3 premium receivers and premium tight end that Kirk Cousins has to work with. I think there's enough right here that we can be satisfied, though. On the ground for this team, Alexander Mattison taking over. Dalvin out of town obviously came over to join the New York Jets and go championship hunting with his pal Aaron Rodgers. 65.73 for Mattison. Pretty fair price. I have to imagine he's going to be popular, though. I think people are going to be going here. I think people are going to be expecting volume. He's been good when he's gotten into those backup roles, when he's gotten some appearances. In 17 games last year, scored 5 touchdowns on only 74 carries, 283 yards. 1 touchdown receiving, 15 of 18 for 91 yards. So got in the end zone, if nothing else, somewhat effectively. But now kind of the more featured guy when he's expected to do more things. I don't know that I want to go there that much. I kind of want the passing game in this one a lot more than I want the ground game. Ty Chandler steps in second on the depth chart. 3 games, 6 carries last year, but a 4.38 40 time. His last year in college at at UNC. Transfer from Tennessee to UNC. Okay. 1,092 yards on 182 carries, 13 touchdowns in 2021. 5th round pick at it in the 2022 draft. So not a ton of draft capital. Didn't do anything at all last year. 2 touches a game. Didn't get in the end zone. Didn't catch any passes. The point is you're not necessarily going there. Myles Gaskin, he was released. He was re-signed to the practice squad, and then they elevated him for Sunday's game. So he'll be on the roster, but probably not good signs that they released him. I don't think we're getting any kind of volume out of that, out of Myles Gaskin. 584 yards, 3 touchdowns in 2020 for Miami. 17 games in 2021. Had 3 touchdowns on 173 carries, 612 yards. Limited. This one is much more passing focused. Cousins has had 4,200 yards in each of his last 3 seasons. Last year he had 4,500 yards, 29 touchdowns. In 2021 he had 33 touchdowns. The year before in 2020 he had 35 touchdowns. For the non-believers, I don't know. That's some evidence of pretty effective passing in my book. He's very productive. The ground game has been downgraded. I think they're going to be throwing even more this season. They're facing a team that ranks 20th by projected defensive DVOA. Only 28th by offense. We need the Bucs to keep up. We need a good game out of Baker Mayfield to keep this one alive. If the Vikings get out a handful of points ahead and just start grinding it and running the clock out, that becomes problematic for our expensive Justin Jefferson or Kirk Cousins plays. I don't think that's the situation, though. Even a quarterback as bad as Baker Mayfield can make things work with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in the offense. A good running back like Chase Edmonds to work with. There are weapons on the Tampa side. I'm not saying I expect Baker Mayfield to go out there and win a slate for anybody. He's a number 1 overall pick 4 years ago. 4th team in the past 2 years. He had an okay performance down the stretch. Couple of okay, interesting enough spots. 27 touchdowns as a rookie and 3,800 yards in his second year. Those are career highs. Never gone beyond those in his 4 years. Not the greatest option, but he's very, very cheap at 4,900 on DK, 63 on FanDuel. You do have premium talent to pair him with. So a few shots of Baker Mayfield stacks are definitely in play here, especially in a premium game like this. You go Baker, Godwin, and Justin Jefferson, I will not tell you you're making any kind of a mistake there. Same thing with Mike Evans. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson and Mayfield, Evans, TJ Hawkinson. Not the worst stack in the world. For Tampa on the ground, Rachaad White should be the lead option now. 17 games last year, 129 carries, 481 yards and a touchdown. 50 of 58 in the passing game, 2 touchdowns. A little bit of viability there until they go out and sign Leonard Fournette again. But for right now, getting a little bit of potential. He is affordable. I want to say he's affordable. 55.64, not ideal pricing. It's playable, but it'll probably get a little bit popular in a game where people might not necessarily say I want to immediately go to the Bucs side for the passing game because they don't trust Baker. I could see Rachaad White getting a little bit popular. Chase Edmonds, a lot of coach speak around the passing game potential. 1 TD through the air last year, 16 of 24 for 157 yards. 311 yards in 2021, no touchdowns, 43 of 53. 402 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air with Arizona in 2020, 53 of 67. Not a major weapon in the passing game, but a little bit of knack for doing it, and they just kind of need to find a role for him in this offense. 3rd on the depth chart overall, but could see some targets, could see some 3rd down usage. A very, very, very low priority mixer at best. Sean Tucker is expected to be the number 2 on the depth chart. He's down here. He was undrafted out of Syracuse because they found a heart condition with him before in the combine or the medical checks before the draft. But made the team as an undrafted rookie, expected to be number 2 on the depth chart. In 12 games last year, 206 carries, 1,060 yards, and 11 touchdowns at Syracuse. 12 touchdowns on 246 carries in 21, 1,496 yards at Cuse. Moderate output through the air, 36 catches in 2022, 248 yards, 2 TDs. A talented enough guy. I don't know that I want to necessarily book him for any shares on this one, though. I'm just more interested in the passing game here. Taking Baker for what he's worth, you go to Chris Godwin. Obviously you're not playing with one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, if not the greatest quarterback of all time, down toward the end of his career anymore. Now you're playing with Baker Mayfield. But Chris Godwin is very, very good. And 5,900, 6,800 feels a little bit cheap for a guy who 9.5 targets a game, 1,023 yards, only 3 TDs, but a 5.1 yards after catch. His counterpart, Mike Evans, gives you the ADOT, 12.6 yard ADOT, 1,124 yards, 6 touchdowns in what was widely perceived as a down season. Mike Evans is no spring chicken, getting a little bit older, but that was a very capable year. Between these two guys, there's a lot of yardage, 2 different types of receivers. There's a lot of looks. There's a lot of volume, potential to get in the end zone. They're both relatively affordable comparative to a lot of the other prices. These guys are affordable. Mike Evans is 3,000 less than Justin Jefferson on the other side. Chris Godwin closing in on that mark. So, those are affordable receivers. Just got to get the Baker Mayfield of it out of the way. Trey Palmer, interesting option, 3,000, 4,400. Again, got to get the Baker Mayfield aspect of it out of the way. But came in 6th rounder, 191st overall. But Russell Gage tore his ACL. He moves up to 3rd on the depth chart. 1,043 yards, 9 touchdowns on 71 catches after transferring from LSU to Nebraska last year. Not a ton of draft capital, but the fact that he's got the position secured on the depth chart, the fact that he's only ahead of Devin Tompkins, Raheem Jarrett on the depth chart, not a lot of guys pushing him really. I think it's an interesting, secure enough spot. I like him probably better than Cade Otton in the passing game, better than Chase Edmonds in the passing game. There's talent there. If you saw Hard Knocks, this is the kid that burnt Sauce Gardner for a 60-yard touchdown on Hard Knocks as his highlight in the preseason. So there's that. He's fast, 4.33 40 time. Give me speed. Give me some speed. Deep shots and speed. That's what I want. Cheap speed. On the football field, not the drug. Rotoscouts encourages you to only spend your money on expensive premium speed if speed is your thing. Don't buy the cheap stuff. Never got into those kinds of things. Speed, coke, uppers, things like that. Things that make me more hyper, more talkative. I don't think we need that. Nobody in the world needs that. Devin Tompkins is the 4th option on the depth chart. A little bit of coach speak. 10 TDs on 102 receptions at Utah State. undrafted free agent, only 5'8". Scored 10 times, 102 catches, 1,700 yards at Utah State. That's not nothing. Not the most premium college program in the world. Raheem Jarrett, another undrafted rookie, 471 yards, 3 touchdowns in 11 games at Maryland, 829 yards, 5 touchdowns the year before. We're probably going to the guys that we know plus Trey Palmer here. Maybe a little bit of Cade Otton. 42 of 65 for 391, 2 touchdowns in 16 games last year. But not my favorite tight end even in this game. That would be TJ Hawkinson on the other side. Vikings, big yes. Tampa Bay coming back the other side. This is a really good opportunity for the run back shares. My primary focus is on getting to Vikings as the stack and using the Rays, using the Bucks as the run back play. But I will have some stacks of Baker Mayfield with the Evans, Godwins, Trey Palmers for sure of the world, and these guys as the run back play. Both sides of this one are definitely options for stacking for me. Whew. I think we talked about everybody in this one up and down. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We've got one game left to go in our marathon Saturday night show. 11 o'clock, pushing time for Saturday Night Live. I never thought I'd be competing for airtime with Saturday Night Live. I don't even know if they've got a new episode on. I don't even know if anybody out there watches Saturday Night Live anymore. But I grew up with Saturday Night Live. It's definitely, not that I watch all the time, I still DVR it. If I heard it's a good episode, I tend to go back to it from time to time. But just part of the fabric of reality for me on Saturday nights is the fact that Saturday Night Live exists at 11:30. Titans versus Saints. Round this one out with a little bit of quality. I should actually change the board that we're looking at here, though, for you guys. And for myself, so I can see the stats. Kendry Miller's up top because I had to slip him in. He was not getting projected originally by accident. Derek Carr taking over the reins in New Orleans. Interesting upgrade for the pass game. I don't dislike Derek Carr overall as a quarterback. Good matchup against a team that ranked 28th in pass defense last year. Good receiver core to work with. Michael Thomas coming back to this offense. There's a little bit of talent here. Obviously, Chris Olave. Juwan Johnson, if you're going down to the tight end spot. Less so when you get to the Rashid Shaheeds of the world. But between a relatively healthy Michael Thomas and Olave, there's a lot of upside there. I like the passing game on the New Orleans side of things. Granted, they're ranked 24th by projected offensive DVOA, 22nd by defensive DVOA. The opportunity is more on the other side of this one. But, excuse me, I was reading that wrong. Those are the, we're getting punchy. Those are the Saints numbers. The Titans side of things. Yeah, no, I was right. No, those are the Titans numbers for the Saints. Whew. Yeah, going up against the 22nd ranked defense, 24th ranked offense. The Saints, 23rd ranked offense, 6th ranked defense by DVOA projections. Now we got that squared away. So I do think there's potential for the passing game for the Saints side of things. The ground game, a little bit more in question. We do have Jamal Williams, who was hyper productive last year, 1,066 yards and 17 touchdowns, kind of out of nowhere. Career high before that was 4 touchdowns in his rookie year back in 2017. He had 3 in 2 other seasons, each of 2 other seasons, but nobody was expecting 17. 12 of 16 for 73 yards in the passing game. More looks in his previous season, had 5 touchdowns on 253 yards, 39 of 45 in 2019 receiving. That's just to kind of hammer the point home that he's not Alvin Kamara when it comes to receiving. Maybe when it comes to the ground game, when it comes to punching the ball into the end zone, there's some upside there. Kamara's out for 3 games with a suspension. It's going to be Jamal Williams. It's going to be a little bit of Kendry Miller. He's questionable with a hammy. 17 touchdowns at TCU last year, 1,399 yards on 224 carries. He was a 3rd-round pick, 71st overall. I would expect him to see volume when fully healthy. I just question the amount of volume he'll get in this spot if he plays at all. Michael Thomas, when last fully healthy, he's played 10 games in the last 3 seasons, 7 in 2020, 3 in 2022. From 2016 to 2019, he had 9, 5, 9, and 9 touchdowns. 1,137 yards when he was a rookie in 2016, and that increased every single season all the way up to 1,725 yards in that monster 2019 season. Caught 149 of 185 passes that year. Massive target share those years. I'm really not sure what to expect, but I think Derek Carr is going to want to throw the ball to Michael Thomas here. Just on a premium guy kind of a thing. He's got Olave to work with. Big uptick for him. 72 of 119 for 1,042 yards and 4 touchdowns with Andy Dalton throwing to him. His last year at Ohio State, he scored 13 times, 60 on 65 catches, 936 yards. And we saw him just do it, very, very good season last year. Between Derek Carr, moving from Andy Dalton to Derek Carr, you get an uptick from 7.9 yards intended air yards per pass attempt, all the way up to 9.1 intended air yards per pass attempt. Derek Carr, if nothing else, likes to air the ball out. That works for me with both Michael Thomas and Chris Olave. I like that spot. 14.2 yard ADOT for Olave last year. 10.8 for Michael Thomas in limited action. 11.6 for Rashid Shaheed. That's not nothing. 2 touchdowns, 488 yards on only 2.8 looks a game. All right. 12 games as a rookie. 3rd on the depth chart this year. 488 yards total last year. 68-yard long. 17.4 yards per catch. He's got a 4.340 time. Fast. Cheap speed. 37.54. A lot more affordable on the DK slate. Cheap speed on the DK slate. Kind of a mix in on the FanDuel slate. Taysom Hill, the weirdo. Tight end. Has those big games from time to time. Can throw the ball. Can run the ball. Do a lot with it. Got in the end zone 7 times on the ground. 2 times through the air last year. There's some ability there. 3,700, 6,000. Do we go to him that many times over Juwan Johnson with questions about what the workload's going to look like, what the output's going to look like? Juwan Johnson, last year, 42 of 65, 508 yards, 7 touchdowns. That was mostly because Thomas was out, but there's not a lack of talent there. 3,900, 5,100. Tight ends did well against the Titans last season. Not a terrible spot there. Derek Carr, certainly proven to like throwing to tight ends. We know that much about Derek Carr. Saints D, I think, is a little bit playable against the Titans here. 4,300. Don't know what the DraftKings price is. One of the higher projections on the board. Tennessee on the other side. 5.84 in the defensive model. 3,800. Pretty cheap. If you get the idea of a limited Saints team, given the no Alvin Kamara the situation, maybe Derek Carr not totally comfortable with the receivers yet, you expect him to shut down Williams, I could see a couple value darts around the Tennessee defense. I don't think it's crazy. 41.5 total in this one. Only a 3-point spread. I don't think that's all that crazy. They didn't rank out great. 22nd in the projected DVOA defensively. Not a great option. Not a great option in the passing game either. Ryan Tannehill. Doesn't project out very well at all for me. I don't imagine he's projecting very well anywhere else in the industry. New Orleans number 5 DVOA versus the pass. So that's not helpful. Only 13 touchdown passes in 12 games last year. Only 21 the year before. It's kind of a skippable option. I think we all know that the story of this offense is Derrick Henry. You do have D-Hop here. You do have Treylon Burks, who I do believe is talented. So it's not like Tannehill doesn't have good receivers to throw to. He's just an underperformer overall. Game manager, he can win a football game. I'd much rather I would be much more inclined to say that Tannehill could go out and win a football game before I would say Tannehill is going to go out and win you a DFS tournament. Let's put it that way. Hopkins joining this team 9 games last year after a PED suspension. Monster target share in the games he did play. Saw 96 targets in only 9 games. Caught 64 of them. Only scored 3 times. 717 yards in only played 10 games in 2021, 8 touchdowns, 42 of 64 for 572 yards. Hasn't had a double-digit touchdown season since 2018 when he went for 11. But clearly the lead option in this offense, 6,900, 7,500. I mean, Derrick Henry's the lead option, but in the passing game. Treylon Burks, not ideal for DFS, more of a short route runner. As a rookie last year, 1 touchdown, 444 yards, 33 of 54. I do believe there's talent there. 11.6 yard data. Why did I say that he was a short yard specialist? That was a mistake. Ignore that note. I don't know where that came from. 11.6 yard data. That's not short. Sorry about that. One mistake for a 4-hour show. I think we're okay. I'm sure I made many mistakes, but that was one of them. Treylon definitely runs some routes. So an interesting enough option if you're inclined to go to Tannehill. But again, the story's Derrick Henry. It always is with this option. Crazy volume, 23 rush attempts per game for his career. Top 5 fantasy points per game each of the last 5 years. Last year, 349 carries. Again, another guy just over that magic number, but it doesn't seem to matter with Derrick Henry. 29 years old now. Eventually, he's going to break down. Double-digit touchdowns every season since 2018. 12, 16, 17, 10, and 13. Working forward in time from 2018. 10 TDs, 937 yards in 2021 in only 8 games. 17 touchdowns in 2020 with 2,027 yards. He even caught balls last year. 398 yards, 33 of 41 in the passing game for career highs. As if he could get any better for fantasy. He also had a 100% completion rate and 1 touchdown pass. Derrick Henry is a beast. 7,800, 8,500. Not expensive enough on DK. Perfectly viable on both sites. Going up against a stout defense for sure, but the Derrick Henry of it outweighs that. Hopefully people don't go to him. I'll happily take my shares. Until he fails me completely, I'll keep going back to Derrick Henry. Nick Westbrook-Ikini, 25 of 50 last year, 3 touchdowns. Had 4 touchdowns the year before on 57 targets, 476 yards. Fewer yards last year, but a 12.8 yard ADOT. Interesting deep ball option. Another deep ball guy to mix into the equation there. Not great, but a playable part. Chris Moore, 30 years old, had a career high 3 touchdowns in 2017 with Baltimore. Probably not a lot to see with the Chris Moore of it. So much so that he's also not on this list. Chig Okonkwo. Playable part at tight end, but the Saints were good against tight ends. 450 yards, 3 touchdowns as a rookie. 447 yards and 5 touchdowns on 52 catches in 13 games for Maryland in 2021. Good enough output in the rookie year. Oh, I don't know what I... Oh, wait, no, I have to change his name to Chig. That's right. Chigosium. Chigosium goes by Chig around here. Until the fantasy sites change his name, anyway. So again, 7.6 yard ADOT, 450 yards, 9.78 yards per target. That's pretty good target yardage share per target. Taysom Hill's 33 years old. I didn't realize he was that old. Even though I noted it at like 6 a.m. when I was finishing up this slate. As I'm doing now. Finishing up this slate. Who did I not talk about here? Talked about Rashid Shaheed. Traquan Smith. I think he got officially ruled out. Pretty sure. Apologies if not. Talked about Olave. Talked about Kendry Miller. DeAndre Hopkins. Talked about Jamal. TJ Spears. Back up to Derrick Henry. Rookie out of Tulane. 19 touchdowns on 229 carries yet last year. That's a lot of volume for college. 1,581 yards. 19 touchdowns at Tulane. Again, not the premium college program in the world. Second on the depth chart behind Derrick Henry is never good. You're just not going to see volume there. I don't think he's all that playable. 4,900, 5,300. He's not even cheap enough. Doesn't really make sense. That might have been our last player, gang. I think I've talked about everybody else on the board. You guys rock. It's 11:30. 11:18. Michael Knack says Terry's a goat. Nobody breaks down a slate like T. McBee. Nobody's crazy enough to spend 4 hours talking to themselves. Anywhere else in the industry, there's more than one person on this show. I'll give myself that much. I love this shit. I really do. I enjoy talking to you guys. I enjoy that you guys come here and hang out and hopefully get a lot out of this. I know there was a lot there. A lot of that is just kind of encapsulated in just look at the list of the plays that are in that article that I wrote for the groups. A lot of these just, play this guy, play that guy is just going to get taken care of. If you just go to your optimizer of choice, set up those rules, set up those groups the way that I put it out there, you're going to get to the plays that I am talking about on this show. You're going to get to the plays that are projected well in my model. With that in mind, you guys, it's about that time. OS asks, favorite FanDuel only plays, favorite tight end on FanDuel. Just because I love that Minnesota spot. Give me some Hawkinson. I kind of just like that. Now that I can move some stuff around. You want to do that? Highest projected tight end on FanDuel is also TJ Hawkinson. He's probably going to get a lot of ownership. I don't really care. Again, I get different just by virtue of how the lineups come together anyway. So I don't care about any individual ownership. I care a little bit about the stack, the specific highly owned combinations within that stack. So like this pairing of guys is more highly owned by a lot than this pairing of the wide receiver 2. That leads me to a lot of wide receiver 2 combinations. But Hawkinson top of my board there. I just really, really like that Minnesota spot. Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Dallas Goedert. You're not going wrong with any one of those guys. That said, I do think either of these guys at cheaper prices could be really interesting. If you tell me you don't want to go to Hawkinson, if you tell me you don't have the money for Andrews, Kittle, or Goddard, or you want to avoid a little bit of ownership that those guys will probably draw, Kyle Pitts, Evan Engram. Talent, breakout, cheap. I like those options. Njoku could get something done. But yeah, you asked favorite. Favorite is TJ Hawkinson. Trey says Joker probably thinks you're crazy talking to yourself. He's probably not the only one. Michael Knack says Thomas is very interesting this week. I think so. I totally agree, dude. Like that spot. I'm curious to see what he does with this season. I don't know if he's shot. I don't know what to expect out of Thomas. But I'm going to have some. With that in mind, you guys, I'm going to be up the rest of the night probably building out some lineups. I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen tomorrow morning. I'd like to get on the air and just maybe do like an hour without going like play by play, just kind of talk strategy, talk about lineup builds that I stumbled across that I like, talk about the updates that I made to the groups column. I'm going to see if I can pull that off at probably 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. I'd need to leave myself 2 hours of time to make my lineups and get everything sorted and in. But I'd love to get on the air tomorrow morning and talk to you guys. Worst case, tomorrow first thing in the morning, you're going to have an update for the rankings, the projections, and the groups column. Absolute worst case. Everything will be up to speed. Everything will be ready to rock for you tomorrow morning. Michael Knack. Luke fucking Musgrave. That's his favorite guy. I like it. Michael Knack's already got his favorite for the season. That one better work out, fella. I'm going to make sure I got some Luke Musgrave in there now, just in case. Mamba points out last year the Titans gave up the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers with an average of 21.5 points respectively for each player. That's pretty monstrous. Not insignificant numbers there for sure. Feeds the idea of upside for New Orleans. Interesting. All right, guys, hit me up in the Discord. Come hang out in Discord. Discord's totally free. The link should be updated into the football channel in the description here. It's also linked from the top of the site, although that one's probably dead. DM me, message me on Twitter, etc., etc. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Coming up on 11:25. I think I'm going to punch out rather than trying to talk my way to 11:30. It's been 3 hours and 52 minutes. Still 40 of you lunatics here hanging out. I love it. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Favorite football movies? I think we've done that on shows before. Little Giants is in the mix. It's probably my favorite football movie. But there's a lot of good ones. Any Given Sunday, if we're talking about actual movies, that's a great movie. Just the Pacino, we fight, we die for that inch. That whole great locker room speech. But that's a good movie overall. What are the good football movies? Necessary Roughness. Rob Schneider doing the commentary. Before Rob Schneider became the current version of Rob Schneider. He's down at the 47, although he did hydroplane to the 19 when they're playing in that game with all the rain. Guy goes sliding. All right, I'm going to punch out, gang. Talking about quotes from Rob Schneider from movies from 30 years ago that nobody's ever seen. Any Given Sunday's amazing. Yeah, I totally think so, Josh. Oliver Stone, for all his flaws, is a good filmmaker and gets deep into projects like that. That was, at the time, it kind of came out and it was like, wow, this is an ugly take on the NFL. And I think everything he put in that movie has kind of not come true, but been revealed to have been the truth all along about the NFL. But yeah, really, really interesting. You can see a lot of parallels to real life. Lawrence Taylor's in that movie too. Absolutely. Yep. LT was Shark, nicknamed Shark, the big linebacker. Who was dealing with the concussions, needed to get that one last game in to get his bonus or whatever it was, or one sack to get his bonus or whatever it was. Just a lot of foresight in that movie. James Woods is the shady doctor. Who could you cast better to be? Anytime you need a shady asshole in a movie, call up James Woods. And you can actually just take in a movie out of that sentence. And anytime you need a shady asshole, call up James Woods. All right. 11:24. I'm going to punch out before we get to the 4-hour point, guys. I got to take a breather, rest my voice. Probably not going to be able to speak tomorrow. We'll see. Longest show I've ever done. But with that, I got to get some lineups built. So good luck out there. Somebody go win something. Go take these picks. Go take those lineup builds and go win yourself $1 million tomorrow because it's on the table on both sites. A lot of people in your way, but we've got some clear paths. We've got a lot of angles into the slate to cut a lot of those people out of our lives. That's an interesting point to make real quick. The reason with some of those low-end, later depth dart plays, not total darts, guys with reasonable expectation of a little bit of volume, a couple looks, the speed, the cheap speed, the deep threat type guys. When you get the right combination, and to put a point on it, Michael Knack, I disagree with you. Worst movie ever, The Last Boy Scout. Come now. A Shane Black script starring Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans. A little bit of football in there, which is why I assume it came up. Yeah, it's a cheesy movie, of course. It's a cheesy 90s action movie, but worst movie ever? Come on. You're driving in the car, and he holds up the sign. It says bomb, B-O-M, with a little picture of a bomb. And he doesn't know what he means. He starts shooting at him. Bruce Willis looks at him. He goes, I forgot to tell you, bomb means fuck you in Polish. Ridiculous. Why do I know that? Shane Black, a good writer of movies, though. I like a lot of Shane Black scripts. The Nice Guys was really good. One of his more recent ones. Russell Crowe and another buddy cop movie. Same vein, same kind of thing. Funnier than Last Boy Scout. Russell Crowe and... his name just went out of my head. Ryan Gosling. Funny movie. The point I was trying to make was if you take the example of like the Showdown slate, which is an imperfect example for this, but the concept applies. If in that Showdown slate that had 192,000 entries in it, if you had combinations of both Rice and Bell, who both scored touchdowns in that for KC in that game, they were owned at 3% and 2 and change percent on the FanDuel slate. So figure they're owned less than 1% of the time in lineups together. So out of 192,000 lineups, we've cut our competition down to a few hundred lineups that have those two people. And that's what I was saying before about now that I've built that nest of things to fall into, it was just a matter of how many times do I have that combination of guys versus where the field is at on it? How many opportunities am I going to have to let things fall in there? And then it just becomes a matter of letting the chips fall where they will, letting the chalk plays drop into those spots. And you hope that you got the right chalk in there with the value plays that connect. I like looking at the slate through that prism rather than looking at the slate the other way around through these are the premium guys, these are the expensive guys I want to get to. Give me the darts. Give me the cheap speed. Give me the value guys, the ADOT guys. You're tired, you're poor, you'll huddle masses with yearning to be free. All right, boys. That's it. Enough said. Good luck out there. Somebody go win something. I'll see you probably tomorrow.